Chapter 20 of Cousin Betty by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by James Waring. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 20. "By heaven, only a woman of the world is capable of such love," said Crevel to himself. "How she came down those stairs, lighting them up with her eyes, following me! Never did Josepha Josepha, she is a cagmag!" cried the ex-bagman. "What have I said? Cagmag? Why, I might have let the word slip out at the Tuileries. I can never do any good unless Valerie educates me, and I was so bent on being a gentleman. What a woman she is! She upsets me like a fit of the colic when she looks at me coldly. What grace, what wit! Never did Josepha move me so. And what perfection when you come to know her! Ha! There is my man." He perceived in the gloom of the Rue de Babylone the tall, somewhat stooping figure of Hulot, stealing along close to a boarding, and he went straight up to him. "Good morning, Baron, for it is past midnight, my dear fellow. What the devil are you doing here? You are airing yourself under a pleasant drizzle; that is not wholesome at our time of life. Will you let me give you a little piece of advice? Let each of us go home, for between you and me, you will not see the candle in the window." The last words made the Baron suddenly aware that he was 63 and that his cloak was wet. "Who on earth told you?" he began. "Valerie, of course, our Valerie, who means henceforth to be my Valerie. We are even now, Baron. We will play off the tie when you please. You have nothing to complain of. You know I always stipulated for the right of taking my revenge. It took you 3 months to rob me of Josepha; I took Valerie from you in we will say no more about that. Now I mean to have her all to myself. But we can be very good friends all the same." "Crevel, no jesting," said Hulot in a voice choked by rage. "It is a matter of life and death." "Bless me, is that how you take it? Baron, do you not remember what you said to me the day of Hortense's marriage? Can 2 old gaffers like us quarrel over a petticoat? It is too low, too common. We are Régence, we agreed. Pompadour, 18th century, quite the Maréchal Richelieu, Louis XV. Nay, and I may say, liaison dangereuse." Crevel might have gone on with his string of literary allusions. The Baron heard him as a deaf man listens when he is but half deaf. But seeing in the gaslight the ghastly pallor of his face, the triumphant mayor stopped short. This was indeed a thunderbolt after Madame Olivier's asseverations and Valerie's parting glance. "Good God! And there are so many other women in Paris," he said at last. "That is what I said to you when you took Josepha," said Crevel. "Look here, Crevel, it is impossible. Give me some proof. Have you a key, as I have, to let yourself in?" And having reached the house, the Baron put the key into the lock, but the gate was immovable. He tried in vain to open it. "Do not make a noise in the streets at night," said Crevel coolly. "I tell you, Baron, I have far better proof than you can show." "Proofs! Give me proof!" cried the Baron, almost crazy with exasperation. "Come, and you shall have them," said Crevel. And in obedience to Valerie's instructions, he led the Baron away towards the quay down the Rue Hillerin Bertin. The unhappy Baron walked on as a merchant walks on the day before he stops payment. He was lost in conjectures as to the reasons of the depravity buried in the depths of Valerie's heart, and still believed himself the victim of some practical joke. As they crossed the Pont Royal, life seemed to him so blank, so utterly a void, and so out of joint from his financial difficulties, that he was within an ace of yielding to the evil prompting that bid him fling Crevel into the river and throw himself in after. On reaching the Rue du Dauphin, which had not yet been widened, Crevel stopped before a door in a wall. It opened into a long corridor paved with black and white marble, and serving as an entrance hall, at the end of which there was a flight of stairs and a doorkeeper's lodge, lighted from an inner courtyard, as is often the case in Paris. This courtyard, which was shared with another house, was oddly divided into two unequal portions. Crevel's little house, for he owned it, had additional rooms with a glass skylight, built out onto the adjoining plot, under conditions that it should have no story added above the ground floor, so that the structure was entirely hidden by the lodge and the projecting mass of the staircase. This back building had long served as a storeroom, back shop, and kitchen to one of the shops facing the street. Crevel had cut off these three rooms from the rest of the ground floor, and Grindot had transformed them into an inexpensive private residence. There were two ways in: from the front, through the shop of a furniture dealer, to whom Crevel let it at a low price, and only from month to month, so as to be able to get rid of him in case of his telling tales, and also through a door in the wall of the passage, so ingeniously hidden as to be almost invisible. The little apartment, comprising a dining room, drawing room, and bedroom, all lighted from above, and standing partly on Crevel's ground and partly on his neighbour's, was very difficult to find. With the exception of the second-hand furniture dealer, the tenants knew nothing of the existence of this little paradise. The doorkeeper, paid to keep Crevel's secrets, was a capital cook. So Monsieur le Maire could go in and out of his inexpensive retreat at any hour of the night without any fear of being spied upon. By day, a lady, dressed as Paris women dress to go shopping, and having a key, ran no risk in coming to Crevel's lodgings. She would stop to look at the cheapened goods, ask the price, go into the shop, and come out again, without exciting the smallest suspicion if anyone should happen to meet her. As soon as Crevel had lighted the candles in the sitting-room, the Baron was surprised at the elegance and refinement it displayed. The perfumer had given the architect a free hand, and Grindot had done himself credit by fittings in the Pompadour style, which had in fact cost 60,000 francs. "What I want," said Crevel to Grindot, "is that a duchess, if I brought one there, should be surprised at it." He wanted to have a perfect Parisian Eden for his Eve, his real lady, his Valerie, his duchess. "There are two beds," said Crevel to Hulot, showing him a sofa that could be made wide enough by pulling out a drawer. "This is one, the other is in the bedroom. We can both spend the night here." "Proof!" was all the Baron could say. Crevel took a flat candlestick and led Hulot into the adjoining room, where he saw, on a sofa, a superb dressing gown belonging to Valerie, which he had seen her wear in the Rue Vanneau, to display it before wearing it in Crevel's little apartment. The Mayor pressed the spring of a little writing table of inlaid work, known as a bonheur de jour, and took out of it a letter that he handed to the Baron. "Read that," said he. The Councillor read these words written in pencil: "I have waited in vain, you old wretch. A woman of my quality does not expect to be kept waiting by a retired perfumer. There was no dinner ordered, no cigarettes. I will make you pay for this." Well, is that her writing? "Good God!" gasped Hulot, sitting down in dismay. "I see all the things she uses, her caps, her slippers. Why, how long since—" Crevel nodded that he understood, and took a packet of bills out of the little inlaid cabinet. "You can see, old man, I paid the decorators in December 1838. In October, 2 months before, this charming little place was first used." Hulot bent his head. "How the devil do you manage it? I know how she spends every hour of her day." "How about her walk in the Tuileries?" said Crevel, rubbing his hands in triumph. "What then?" said Hulot, mystified. "Your lady love comes to the Tuileries; she is supposed to be airing herself from 1 till 4. But hop, skip, and jump, and she is here. You know your Molière? Well, Baron, there is nothing imaginary in your title." Hulot, left without a shred of doubt, sat sunk in ominous silence. Catastrophes lead intelligent and strong-minded men to be philosophical. The Baron, morally, was at this moment like a man trying to find his way by night through a forest. This gloomy taciturnity and the change in that dejected countenance made Crevel very uneasy, for he did not wish the death of his colleague. "As I said, old fellow, we are now even. Let us play for the odd. Will you play off the tie by hook and by crook? Come." "Why," said Hulot, talking to himself, "why is it that out of 10 pretty women at least 7 are false?" But the Baron was too much upset to answer his own question. Beauty is the greatest of human gifts for power. Every power that has no counterpoise, no autocratic control, leads to abuses and folly. Despotism is the madness of power. In women, the despot is caprice. "You have nothing to complain of, my good friend. You have a beautiful wife, and she is virtuous." "I deserve my fate," said Hulot. "I have undervalued my wife and made her miserable. And she is an angel. Oh, my poor Adeline, you are avenged. She suffers in solitude and silence, and she is worthy of my love. I ought, for she is still charming, fair, and girlish even. But was there ever a woman known more base, more ignoble, more villainous than this Valerie?" "She is a good-for-nothing slut," said Crevel, "a hussy that deserves whipping in the Place du Châtelet. But, my dear Canillac, though we are such blades, so Maréchal de Richelieu, Louis XV, Pompadour, Madame du Barry, gay dogs, and everything that is most 18th century, there is no longer a lieutenant of police." "How can we make them love us?" Hulot wondered to himself without heeding Crevel. "It is sheer folly in us to expect to be loved, my dear fellow," said Crevel. "We can only be endured, for Madame Marneffe is 100 times more profligate than Josepha." "And avaricious; she costs me 192,000 francs a year," cried Hulot. "And how many centimes?" sneered Crevel, with the insolence of a financier who scorns so small a sum. "You do not love her, that is very evident," said the Baron dolefully. "I have had enough of her," replied Crevel, "for she has had more than 300,000 francs of mine." "Where is it? Where does it all go?" said the Baron, clasping his head in his hands. "If we had come to an agreement, like the simple young men who combine to maintain a twopenny baggage, she would have cost us less." "That is an idea," replied the Baron. "But she would still be cheating us; for, my burly friend, what do you say to this Brazilian?" "Ay, old sly fox, you are right. We are swindled like shareholders," said Crevel. "All such women are an unlimited liability, and we the sleeping partners." "Then it was she who told you about the candle in the window?" "My good man," replied Crevel, striking an attitude, "she has fooled us both. Valerie is a She told me to keep you here. Now I see it all. She has got her Brazilian. Oh, I have done with her; for if you hold her hands, she would find a way to cheat you with her feet. There! She is a minx, a jade." "She is lower than a prostitute," said the Baron. "Josepha and Jenny Cadine were in their rights when they were false to us; they make a trade of their charms." "But she who affects the saint, the prude," said Crevel. "I tell you what, Hulot, do you go back to your wife. Your money matters are not looking well. I have heard talk of certain notes of hand given to a low usurer whose special line of business is lending to these sluts, a man named Vauvinet. For my part, I am cured of your real ladies. And after all, at our time of life, what do we want of these swindling hussies, who, to be honest, cannot help playing us false? You have white hair and false teeth, I am of the shape of Silenus. I shall go in for saving. Money never deceives one. Though the treasury is indeed open to all the world twice a year, it pays you interest, and this woman swallows it. With you, my worthy friend, as Gubetta, as my partner in the concern, I might have resigned myself to a shady bargain, no, a philosophical calm. But with a Brazilian who has possibly smuggled in some doubtful colonial produce "Woman is an inexplicable creature," said Hulot. "I can explain her," said Crevel. "We are old. The Brazilian is young and handsome." "Yes, that I own is true," said Hulot. "We are older than we were. But, my dear fellow, how is one to do without these pretty creatures? Seeing them undress, twist up their hair, smile cunningly through their fingers as they screw up their curl papers, put on all their airs and graces, tell all their lies, declare that we don't love them when we are worried with business, and they cheer us in spite of everything. Yes, by the power, it is the only pleasure in life," cried Crevel. "When a saucy little mug smiles at you and says, 'My old dear, you don't know how nice you are. I am not like other women, I suppose, who go crazy over mere boys with goats' beards, smelling of smoke and as coarse as serving men. For in their youth they are so insolent, they come in and they bid you good morning, and out they go. I, whom you think such a flirt, I prefer a man of 50 to these brats. A man who will stick by me, who is devoted, who knows a woman is not to be picked up every day, and appreciates us. That is what I love you for, you old monster!' And they fill up these avowals with little pettings and prettinesses, and faugh! They are as false as the bills on the Hôtel de Ville." "A lie is sometimes better than the truth," said Hulot, remembering sundry bewitching scenes called up by Crevel, who mimicked Valerie. "They are obliged to act upon their lies, to sew spangles on their stage frocks." "And they are ours, after all, the lying jades," said Crevel coarsely. "Valerie is a witch," said the Baron. "She can turn an old man into a young one." "Oh yes," said Crevel, "she is an eel that wriggles through your hands, but the prettiest eel, as white and sweet as sugar, as amusing as Arnal, and ingenious." "Yes, she is full of fun," said Hulot, who had now quite forgotten his wife. The colleagues went to bed the best friends in the world, reminding each other of Valerie's perfections, the tones of her voice, her kittenish way, her movements, her fun, her sallies of wit and of affections; for she was an artist in love, and had charming impulses, as tenors may sing a scena better one day than another. And they fell asleep, cradled in tempting and diabolical visions, lighted by the fires of hell. At 9 o'clock next morning, Hulot went off to the War Office. Crevel had business out of town. They left the house together, and Crevel held out his hand to the Baron, saying, "To show that there is no ill feeling. For we, neither of us, will have anything more to say to Madame Marneffe?" "Oh, this is the end of everything," replied Hulot, with a sort of horror. By 10:30, Crevel was mounting the stairs, for at a time, up to Madame Marneffe's apartment. He found the infamous wretch, the adorable enchantress, in the most becoming morning wrapper, enjoying an elegant little breakfast in the society of the Baron Montes de Montejanos and Lisbeth. Though the sight of the Brazilian gave him a shock, Crevel begged Madame Marneffe to grant him 2 minutes' speech with her. Valerie led Crevel into the drawing-room. "Valerie, my angel," said the amorous mayor, "Monsieur Marneffe cannot have long to live. If you will be faithful to me, when he dies we will be married. Think it over. I have rid you of Hulot. So just consider whether this Brazilian is to compare with a mayor of Paris, a man who for your sake will make his way to the highest dignities, and who can already offer you 80 thousand francs a year." "I will think it over," said she. "You will see me in the Rue du Dauphin at 2 o'clock, and we can discuss the matter. But be a good boy, and do not forget the bond you promised to transfer to me." She returned to the dining room, followed by Crevel, who flattered himself that he had hit on a plan for keeping Valerie to himself. But there he found Baron Hulot, who, during this short colloquy, had also arrived with the same end in view. He, like Crevel, begged for a brief interview. Madame Marneffe again rose to go to the drawing-room, with a smile at the Brazilian that seemed to say, "What fools they are! Cannot they see you?" "Valerie," said the official, "my child, that cousin of yours is an American cousin." "Oh, that is enough!" she cried, interrupting the Baron. "Marneffe never has been, and never will be, never can be my husband. The first, the only man I ever loved has come back quite unexpectedly. It is no fault of mine. But look at Henri, and look at yourself. Then ask yourself whether a woman, and a woman in love, can hesitate for a moment. My dear fellow, I am not a kept mistress. From this day forth I refuse to play the part of Susanna between the two elders. If you really care for me, you and Crevel, you will be our friends. But all else is at an end, for I am 26, and henceforth I mean to be a saint, an admirable and worthy wife, as yours is." "Is that what you have to say?" answered Hulot. "Is this the way you receive me when I come like a pope, with my hands full of indulgences? Well, your husband will never be a first-class clerk, nor be promoted in the Legion of Honor." "That remains to be seen," said Madame Marneffe with a meaning look at Hulot. "Well, well, no temper," said Hulot in despair. "I will call this evening, and we will come to an understanding." "In Lisbeth's rooms, then." "Very good, at Lisbeth's," said the old dotard. Hulot and Crevel went downstairs together, without speaking a word till they were in the street. But outside, on the sidewalk, they looked at each other with a dreary laugh. "We are a couple of old fools," said Crevel. "I have got rid of them," said Madame Marneffe to Lisbeth as she sat down once more. "I never loved and I never shall love any man but my jaguar," she added, smiling at Henri Montes. "Lisbeth, my dear, you don't know. Henri has forgiven me the infamy to which I was reduced by poverty." "It was my own fault," said the Brazilian. "I ought to have sent you 100,000 francs." "Poor boy!" said Valerie. "I might have worked for my living, but my fingers were not made for that. Ask Lisbeth." The Brazilian went away the happiest man in Paris. At noon, Valerie and Lisbeth were chatting in the splendid bedroom where this dangerous woman was giving to her dress those finishing touches which a lady alone can give. The doors were bolted, the curtains drawn over them, and Valerie related in every detail all the events of the evening, the night, the morning. "What do you think of it all, my darling?" she said to Lisbeth in conclusion. "Which shall I be when the time comes, Madame Crevel or Madame Montes?" "Crevel will not last more than 10 years, such a profligate as he is," replied Lisbeth. "Montes is young. Crevel will leave you about 30,000 francs a year. Let Montes wait. He will be happy enough as Benjamin. And so, by the time you are 33, if you take care of your looks, you may marry your Brazilian and make a fine show with 60,000 francs a year of your own, especially under the wing of a marechal." "Yes, but Montes is a Brazilian; he will never make his mark," observed Valerie. "We live in the day of railways," said Lisbeth, "when foreigners rise to high positions in France." "We shall see," replied Valerie, "when Marneffe is dead. He has not much longer to suffer." "These attacks that return so often are a sort of physical remorse," said Lisbeth. "Well, I am off to see Hortense." "Yes, go, my angel," replied Valerie, "and bring me my artist. 3 years, and I have not gained an inch of ground. It is a disgrace to both of us. Wenceslas and Henri, these are my two passions, one for love, the other for fancy." "You are lovely this morning," said Lisbeth, putting her arm round Valerie's waist and kissing her forehead. "I enjoy all your pleasures, your good fortune, your dresses. I never really lived till the day when we became sisters." "Wait a moment, my tiger cat," cried Valerie, laughing. "Your shawl is crooked. You cannot put a shawl on yet, in spite of my lessons for 3 years, and you want to be Madame la Marechale Hulot." End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Cousin Betty by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by James Waring. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 21. Shod in prunella boots over grey silk stockings, in a gown of handsome corded silk, her hair in smooth bands under a very pretty black velvet bonnet, lined with yellow satin, Lisbeth made her way to the Rue Saint Dominique by the Boulevard des Invalides, wondering whether sheer dejection would at last break down Hortense's brave spirit, and whether Sarmatian instability, taken at a moment when, with such a character, everything is possible, would be too much for Steinbock's constancy. Hortense and Wenceslas had the ground floor of a house situated at the corner of the Rue Saint Dominique and the Esplanade des Invalides. These rooms, once in harmony with the honeymoon, now had that half-new, half-faded look that may be called the autumnal aspect of furniture. Newly married folks are as lavish and wasteful, without knowing it or intending it, of everything about them as they are of their affection. Thinking only of themselves, they reck little of the future, which at a later time weighs on the mother of a family. Lisbeth found Hortense just as she had finished dressing a baby Wenceslas, who had been carried into the garden. "Good morning, Betty," said Hortense, opening the door herself to her cousin. The cook was gone out, and the house servant, who was also the nurse, was doing some washing. "Good morning, dear child," replied Lisbeth, kissing her. "Is Wenceslas in the studio?" she added in a whisper. "No, he is in the drawing-room, talking to Stidmann and Schaunard." "Can we be alone?" asked Lisbeth. "Come into my room." In this room the hangings of pink-flowered chintz with green leaves on a white ground, constantly exposed to the sun, were much faded, as was the carpet. The muslin curtains had not been washed for many a day. The smell of tobacco hung about the room. For Wenceslas, now an artist of repute, and born a fine gentleman, left his cigar ash on the arms of the chairs and the prettiest pieces of furniture, as a man does to whom love allows everything, a man rich enough to scorn vulgar carefulness. "Now then, let us talk over your affairs," said Lisbeth, seeing her pretty cousin silent in the armchair into which she had dropped. "But what ails you? You look rather pale, my dear." "Two articles have just come out in which my poor Wenceslas is pulled to pieces. I have read them, but I have hidden them from him, for they would completely depress him. The marble statue of Marshal Montcornet is pronounced utterly bad. The bas reliefs are allowed to pass muster, simply to allow of the most perfidious praise of his talent as a decorative artist, and to give the greater emphasis to the statement that serious art is quite out of his reach. Stidmann, whom I besought to tell me the truth, broke my heart by confessing that his own opinion agreed with that of every other artist, of the critics and the public. He said to me in the garden before breakfast, if Wenceslas cannot exhibit a masterpiece next season, he must give up heroic sculpture and be content to execute idyllic subjects, small figures, pieces of jewelry, and high-class goldsmith's work. This verdict is dreadful to me, for Wenceslas, I know, will never accept it. He feels he has so many fine ideas." "Ideas will not pay the tradesman's bills," remarked Lisbeth. "I was always telling him so. Nothing but money. Money is only to be had for work done, things that ordinary folks like well enough to buy them. When an artist has to live and keep a family, he had far better have a design for a candlestick on his counter, or for a fender or a table, than for groups or statues. Everybody must have such things, while he may wait months for the admirer of the group and for his money." "You are right, my good Lisbeth. Tell him all that. I have not the courage. Besides, as he was saying to Stidmann, if he goes back to ornamental work and small sculpture, he must give up all hope of the Institute and grand works of art, and we should not get the 300,000 francs worth of work promised at Versailles and by the city of Paris and the ministers. That is what we are robbed of by those dreadful articles, written by rivals who want to step into our shoes." "And that is not what you dreamed of, poor little puss," said Lisbeth, kissing Hortense on the brow. You expected to find a gentleman, a leader of art, the chief of all living sculptors. But that is poetry, you see, a dream requiring 50,000 francs a year, and you have only 2,400, so long as I live. After my death, 3,000." A few tears rose to Hortense's eyes, and Lisbeth drank them with her eyes as a cat laps milk. This is the story of their honeymoon. The tale will perhaps not be lost on some artists. Intellectual work, labor in the upper regions of mental effort, is one of the grandest achievements of man. That which deserves real glory in art, for by art we must understand every creation of the mind, is courage above all things, a sort of courage of which the vulgar have no conception, and which has never perhaps been described till now. Driven by the dreadful stress of poverty, goaded by Lisbeth, and kept by her in blinders, as a horse is, to hinder it from seeing to the right and left of its road, lashed on by that hard woman, the personification of necessity, a sort of deputy fate, Wenceslas, a born poet and dreamer, had gone on from conception to execution, and overleaped, without sounding it, the gulf that divides these two hemispheres of art. To muse, to dream, to conceive of fine works is a delightful occupation. It is like smoking a magic cigar, or leading the life of a courtesan who follows her own fancy. The work then floats in all the grace of infancy, in the mad joy of conception, with the fragrant beauty of a flower and the aromatic juices of a fruit enjoyed in anticipation. The man who can sketch his purpose beforehand in words is regarded as a wonder, and every artist and writer possesses that faculty. But gestation, fruition, the laborious rearing of the offspring, putting it to bed every night full fed with milk, embracing it anew every morning with the inexhaustible affection of a mother's heart, licking it clean, dressing it 100 times in the richest garb only to be instantly destroyed, then never to be cast down at the convulsions of this headlong life till the living masterpiece is perfected, which in sculpture speaks to every eye, in literature to every intellect, in painting to every memory, in music to every heart. This is the task of execution. The hand must be ready at every instant to come forward and obey the brain. But the brain has no more a creative power at command than love has a perennial spring. The habit of creativeness, the indefatigable love of motherhood which makes a mother, that miracle of nature which Raphael so perfectly understood, the maternity of the brain, in short, which is so difficult to develop, is lost with prodigious ease. Inspiration is the opportunity of genius. She does not indeed dance on the razor's edge; she is in the air and flies away with the suspicious swiftness of a crow. She wears no scarf by which the poet can clutch her; her hair is a flame; she vanishes like the lovely rose and white flamingo, the sportsman's despair. And work, again, is a weariful struggle, alike dreaded and delighted in by these lofty and powerful natures, who are often broken by it. A great poet of our day has said, in speaking of this overwhelming labor, "I sit down to it in despair, but I leave it with regret." Be it known to all who are ignorant. If the artist does not throw himself into his work as Curtius sprang into the gulf, as a soldier leads a forlorn hope without a moment's thought, and if when he is in the crater he does not dig on as a miner does when the earth has fallen in on him, if he contemplates the difficulties before him instead of conquering them one by one, like the lovers in fairy tales who to win their princesses overcome ever new enchantments, the work remains incomplete. It perishes in the studio where creativeness becomes impossible, and the artist looks on at the suicide of his own talent. Rossini, a brother genius to Raphael, is a striking instance in his poverty-stricken youth, compared with his latter years of opulence. This is the reason why the same prize, the same triumph, the same bays are awarded to great poets and to great generals. Wenceslas, by nature a dreamer, had expended so much energy in production, in study, and in work under Lisbeth's despotic rule, that love and happiness resulted in reaction. His real character reappeared, the weakness, recklessness, and indolence of the Sarmatian returned to nestle in the comfortable corners of his soul, whence the schoolmaster's rod had routed them. For the first few months the artist adored his wife. Hortense and Wenceslas abandoned themselves to the happy childishness of a legitimate and unbounded passion. Hortense was the first to release her husband from his labors, proud to triumph over her rival, his art. And indeed a woman's caresses scare away the muse, and break down the sturdy, brutal resolution of the worker. 6 or 7 months slipped by, and the artist's fingers had forgotten the use of the modeling tool. When the need for work began to be felt, when the Prince de Wissembourg, president of the committee of subscribers, asked to see the statue, Wenceslas spoke the inevitable byword of the idler: "I am just going to work on it." And he lulled his dear Hortense with fallacious promises and the magnificent schemes of the artist as he smokes. Hortense loved her poet more than ever. She dreamed of a sublime statue of Marshal Montcornet. Montcornet would be the embodied ideal of bravery, the type of the cavalry officer, of courage à la Murat. Yes, yes, at the mere sight of that statue all the Emperor's victories were to seem a foregone conclusion. And then such workmanship! The pencil was accommodating and answered to the word. By way of a statue, the result was a delightful little Wenceslas. When the progress of affairs required that he should go to the studio at Le Gros Caillou to mould the clay and set up the life-size model, Steinbock found, one day, that the Prince's clock required his presence in the workshop of Florent and Chenor, where the figures were being finished; or, again, the light was grey and dull. To-day he had business to do, to-morrow they had a family dinner, to say nothing of indispositions of mind and body, and the days when he stayed at home to toy with his adored wife. Marshal the Prince de Wissembourg was obliged to be angry to get the clay model finished. He declared that he must put the work into other hands. It was only by dint of endless complaints and much strong language that the committee of subscribers succeeded in seeing the plaster cast. Day after day Steinbock came home, evidently tired, complaining of this hodman's work and his own physical weakness. During that first year the household felt no pinch. The Countess Steinbock, desperately in love with her husband, cursed the War Minister. She went to see him. She told him that great works of art were not to be manufactured like cannon, and that the State, like Louis XIV., Francis I., and Leo X., ought to be at the beck and call of genius. Poor Hortense, believing she held a Phidias in her embrace, had the sort of motherly cowardice for her Wenceslas that is in every wife who carries her love to the pitch of idolatry. "Do not be hurried," said she to her husband. "Our whole future life is bound up with that statue. Take your time and produce a masterpiece." She would go to the studio, and then the enraptured Steinbock wasted 5 hours out of 7 in describing the statue instead of working at it. He thus spent 18 months in finishing the design, which to him was all important. When the plaster was cast and the model complete, poor Hortense, who had looked on at her husband's toil, seeing his health really suffer from the exertions which exhaust a sculptor's frame and arms and hands, Hortense thought the result admirable. Her father, who knew nothing of sculpture, and her mother, no less ignorant, lauded it as a triumph. The War Minister came with them to see it, and, overruled by them, expressed approval of the figure, standing as it did alone in a favorable light, thrown up against a green baize background. Alas, at the Exhibition of 1841, the disapprobation of the public soon took the form of abuse and mockery in the mouths of those who were indignant with the idol too hastily set up for worship. Stidmann tried to advise his friend, but was accused of jealousy. Every article in a newspaper was to Hortense an outcry of envy. Stidmann, the best of good fellows, got articles written in which adverse criticism was contravened, and it was pointed out that sculptors altered their works in translating the plaster into marble, and that the marble would be the test. "In reproducing the plaster sketch in marble," wrote Claude Vignon, "a masterpiece may be ruined or a bad design made beautiful. The plaster is the manuscript, the marble is the book." So in 2 years and a half Wenceslas had produced a statue and a son. The child was a picture of beauty. The statue was execrable. The clock for the prince and the price of the statue paid off the young couple's debts. Steinbock had acquired fashionable habits. He went to the play, to the opera. He talked admirably about art, and in the eyes of the world he maintained his reputation as a great artist by his powers of conversation and criticism. There are many clever men in Paris who spend their lives in talking themselves out, and are content with a sort of drawing-room celebrity. Steinbock, emulating these emasculated but charming men, grew every day more averse to hard work. As soon as he began a thing, he was conscious of all its difficulties, and the discouragement that came over him enervated his will. Inspiration, the frenzy of intellectual procreation, flew swiftly away at the sight of this effete lover. Sculpture, like dramatic art, is at once the most difficult and the easiest of all arts. You have but to copy a model, and the task is done. But to give it a soul, to make it typical by creating a man or a woman, this is the sin of Prometheus. Such triumphs in the annals of sculpture may be counted as we may count the few poets among men. Michelangelo, Michel Colomb, Jean Goujon, Phidias, Praxiteles, Polycletes, Puget, Canova, Albert Dürer are the brothers of Milton, Virgil, Dante, Shakespeare, Tasso, Homer, and Molière. And such an achievement is so stupendous that a single statue is enough to make a man immortal, as Figaro, Lovelace, and Manon Lescaut have immortalized Beaumarchais, Richardson, and the Abbé Prévost. Superficial thinkers, and there are many in the artist world, have asserted that sculpture lives only by the nude, that it died with the Greeks, and that modern vesture makes it impossible. But in the first place, the ancients have left sublime statues entirely clothed, the Polyhymnia, the Julia, and others, and we have not found 1/10 of all their works. And then let any lover of art go to Florence and see Michelangelo's Penseroso, or to the Cathedral of Mainz and behold the Virgin by Albert Dürer, who has created a living woman out of ebony under her threefold drapery, with the most flowing, the softest hair that ever a waiting maid combed through. Let all the ignorant flock thither, and they will acknowledge that genius can give mind to drapery, to armor, to a robe, and fill it with a body, just as a man leaves the stamp of his individuality and habits of life on the clothes he wears. Sculpture is the perpetual realization of the fact which once and never again was in painting, called Raphael. The solution of this hard problem is to be found only in constant persevering toil. For merely to overcome the material difficulties to such an extent, the hand must be so practised, so dexterous and obedient, that the sculptor may be free to struggle soul to soul with the elusive moral element that he has to transfigure as he embodies it. If Paganini, who uttered his soul through the strings of his violin, spent 3 days without practising, he lost what he called the stops of his instrument, meaning the sympathy between the wooden frame, the strings, the bow, and himself. If he had lost this alliance, he would have been no more than an ordinary player. Perpetual work is the law of art, as it is the law of life, for art is idealized creation. Hence, great artists and perfect poets wait neither for commission nor for purchasers. They are constantly creating, today, tomorrow, always. The result is the habit of work, the unfailing apprehension of the difficulties which keep them in close intercourse with the muse and her productive forces. Canova lived in his studio, as Voltaire lived in his study, and so must Homer and Phidias have lived. While Lisbeth kept Wenceslas Steinbock in thraldom in his garret, he was on the thorny road trodden by all these great men, which leads to the Alpine heights of glory. Then happiness, in the person of Hortense, had reduced the poet to idleness, the normal condition of all artists, since to them idleness is fully occupied. Their joy is such as that of the pasha of a seraglio. They revel with ideas, they get drunk at the founts of intellect. Great artists, such as Steinbock, wrapped in reverie, are rightly spoken of as dreamers. They, like opium eaters, all sink into poverty, whereas if they had been kept up to the mark by the stern demands of life, they might have been great men. At the same time, these half-artists are delightful. Men like them and cram them with praise. They even seem superior to the true artists, who are taxed with conceit, unsociableness, contempt of the laws of society. This is why great men are the slaves of their work. Their indifference to outer things, their devotion to their work, make simpletons regard them as egotists, and they are expected to wear the same garb as the dandy who fulfills the trivial evolutions called social duties. These men want the lions of the Atlas to be combed and scented like a lady's poodle. These artists, who are too rarely matched to meet their fellows, fall into habits of solitary exclusiveness. They are inexplicable to the majority, which, as we know, consists mostly of fools, of the envious, the ignorant, and the superficial. Now you may imagine what part a wife should play in the life of these glorious and exceptional beings. She ought to be what, for 5 years, Lisbeth had been, but with the added offering of love, humble and patient love, always ready and always smiling. Hortense, enlightened by her anxieties as a mother, and driven by dire necessity, had discovered too late the mistakes she had been involuntarily led into by her excessive love. Still, the worthy daughter of her mother, her heart ached at the thought of worrying Wenceslas. She loved her dear poet too much to become his torturer, and she could foresee the hour when beggary awaited her, her child, and her husband. "Come, come, my child," said Lisbeth, seeing the tears in her cousin's lovely eyes. "You must not despair. A glassful of tears will not buy a plate of soup. How much do you want?" "Well, 5 or 6,000 francs." "I have but 3,000 at the most," said Lisbeth. "And what is Wenceslas doing now?" "He has had an offer to work in partnership with Stidmann at a table service for the Duc d'Herouville for 6,000 francs. Then Monsieur Chanor will advance 4,000 to repay Monsieur de Lora and Bridau, a debt of honor." "What, you have had the money for the statue and the bas reliefs for Marshal Montcornet's monument, and you have not paid them yet?" "For the last 3 years," said Hortense, "we have spent 12,000 francs a year, and I have but 100 louis a year of my own. The Marshal's monument, when all the expenses were paid, brought us no more than 16,000 francs. Really and truly, if Wenceslas gets no work, I do not know what is to become of us. Oh, if only I could learn to make statues, I would handle the clay!" she cried, holding up her fine arms. The woman, it was plain, fulfilled the promise of the girl. There was a flash in her eye, impetuous blood strong with iron flowed in her veins. She felt that she was wasting her energy in carrying her infant. "Ah, my poor little thing, a sensible girl should not marry an artist till his fortune is made, not while it is still to make." At this moment they heard voices. Stidmann and Wenceslas were seeing Schnurr to the door. Then Wenceslas and Stidmann came in again. Stidmann, an artist in vogue in the world of journalists, famous actresses, and courtesans of the better class, was a young man of fashion whom Valerie much wished to see in her rooms. Indeed, he had already been introduced to her by Claude Vignon. Stidmann had lately broken off an intimacy with Madame Schontz, who had married some months since and gone to live in the country. Valerie and Lisbeth, hearing of this upheaval from Claude Vignon, thought it well to get Steinbock's friend to visit in the Rue Vanneau. Stidmann, out of good feeling, went rarely to the Steinbocks, and as it happened that Lisbeth was not present when he was introduced by Claude Vignon, she now saw him for the first time. As she watched this noted artist, she caught certain glances from his eyes at Hortense, which suggested to her the possibility of offering him to the Countess Steinbock as a consolation if Wenceslas should be false to her. In point of fact, Stidmann was reflecting that if Steinbock were not his friend, Hortense, the young and superbly beautiful Countess, would be an adorable mistress. It was this very notion, controlled by honor, that kept him away from the house. Lisbeth was quick to mark the significant awkwardness that troubles a man in the presence of a woman with whom he will not allow himself to flirt. "Very good looking, that young man," she said in a whisper to Hortense. "Oh, do you think so?" she replied. "I never noticed him." "Stidmann, my good fellow," said Wenceslas in an undertone to his friend, "we are on no ceremony, you and I. We have some business to settle with this old girl." Stidmann bowed to the ladies and went away. "It is settled," said Wenceslas when he came in from taking leave of Stidmann. "But there are 6 months' work to be done, and we must live meanwhile." "There are my diamonds!" cried the young Countess, with the impetuous heroism of a loving woman. A tear rose in Wenceslas' eye. "Oh, I am going to work," said he, sitting down by his wife and drawing her on his knee. "I will do odd jobs, a wedding chest, bronze groups." "But, my children," said Lisbeth, "for, as you know, you will be my heirs, and I shall leave you a very comfortable sum, believe me, especially if you help me to marry the Marshal. Nay, if we succeed in that quickly, I will take you all to board with me, you and Adeline. We should live very happily together. But for the moment, listen to the voice of my long experience. Do not fly to the mont de piete. It is the ruin of the borrower. I have always found that when the interest was due, those who had pledged their things had nothing wherewith to pay up, and then all is lost. I can get you a loan at 5% on your note of hand." "Oh, we are saved!" said Hortense. "Well then, child, Wenceslas had better come with me to see the lender, who will oblige him at my request. It is Madame Marneffe. If you flatter her a little, for she is as vain as a parvenue, she will get you out of the scrape in the most obliging way. Come yourself and see her, my dear Hortense." Hortense looked at her husband with the expression a man condemned to death must wear on his way to the scaffold. "Claude Vignon took Stidmann there," said Wenceslas. "He says it is a very pleasant house." Hortense's head fell. What she felt can only be expressed in one word. It was not pain, it was illness. "But, my dear Hortense, you must learn something of life," exclaimed Lisbeth, understanding the eloquence of her cousin's looks. "Otherwise, like your mother, you will find yourself abandoned in a deserted room, where you will weep like Calypso on the departure of Ulysses, and at an age when there is no hope of Telemachus," she added, repeating a jest of Madame Marneffe's. "We have to regard the people in the world as tools which we can make use of or let alone, according as they can serve our turn. Make use of Madame Marneffe now, my dears, and let her alone by and by. Are you afraid lest Wenceslas, who worships you, should fall in love with a woman 4 or 5 years older than himself, as yellow as a bundle of field peas, and—" "I would far rather pawn my diamonds," said Hortense. "Oh, never go there, Wenceslas, it is hell." "Hortense is right," said Steinbock, kissing his wife. "Thank you, my dearest," said Hortense, delighted. "My husband is an angel, you see, Lisbeth. He does not gamble, he goes nowhere without me. If he only could stick to work! Oh, I should be too happy! Why take us on show to my father's mistress, a woman who is ruining him and is the cause of troubles that are killing my heroic mother?" "My child, that is not where the cause of your father's ruin lies. It was his singer who ruined him, and then your marriage," replied her cousin. "Bless me! Why, Madame Marneffe is of the greatest use to him. However, I must tell no tales." "You have a good word for everybody, dear Betty." Hortense was called into the garden by hearing the child cry. Lisbeth was left alone with Wenceslas. "You have an angel for your wife, Wenceslas," said she. "Love her as you ought, never give her cause for grief." "Yes, indeed, I love her so well that I do not tell her all," replied Wenceslas. "But to you, Lisbeth, I may confess the truth. If I took my wife's diamonds to the Mont de Piete, we should be no further forward." "Then borrow of Madame Marneffe," said Lisbeth. "Persuade Hortense, Wenceslas, to let you go there, or else, bless me, go there without telling her." "That is what I was thinking of," replied Wenceslas, "when I refused for fear of grieving Hortense. Listen to me, I care too much for you both not to warn you of your danger. If you go there, hold your heart tight in both hands, for the woman is a witch. All who see her adore her. She is so wicked, so inviting, she fascinates men like a masterpiece. Borrow her money, but do not leave your soul in pledge. I should never be happy again if you were false to Hortense. Here she is, not another word. I will settle the matter." "Kiss Lisbeth, my darling," said Wenceslas to his wife. "She will help us out of our difficulties by lending us her savings." And he gave Lisbeth a look which she understood. "Then I hope you mean to work, my dear treasure," said Hortense. "Yes, indeed," said the artist. "I will begin to-morrow." "To-morrow is our ruin," said his wife with a smile. "Now, my dear child, say yourself whether some hindrance has not come in the way every day, some obstacle or business." "Yes, very true, my love." "Here," cried Steinbock, striking his brow, "here I have swarms of ideas. I mean to astonish all my enemies. I am going to design a service in the German style of the 16th century, the romantic style, foliage twined with insects, sleeping children, newly invented monsters, chimeras, real chimeras such as we dream of. I see it all. It will be undercut, light, and yet crowded. Chanor was quite amazed. And I wanted some encouragement, for the last article on Montcornet's monument had been crushing." At a moment in the course of the day when Lisbeth and Wenceslas were left together, the artist agreed to go on the morrow to see Madame Marneffe. He either would win his wife's consent, or he would go without telling her. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Cousin Betty by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by James Waring. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 22. Valerie, informed the same evening of this success, insisted that Hulot should go to invite Stidmann, Claude Vignon, and Steinbock to dinner, for she was beginning to tyrannize over him as women of that type tyrannize over old men, who trot round town and go to make interest with every one who is necessary to the interests or the vanity of their task-mistress. Next evening, Valerie armed herself for conquest by making such a toilet as a Frenchwoman can devise when she wishes to make the most of herself. She studied her appearance in this great work as a man going out to fight a duel practises his feints and lunges. Not a speck, not a wrinkle was to be seen. Valerie was at her whitest, her softest, her sweetest, and certain little patches attracted the eye. It is commonly supposed that the patch of the 18th century is out of date or out of fashion. That is a mistake. In these days, women, more ingenious perhaps than of yore, invite a glance through the opera glass by other audacious devices. One is the first to hit on a rosette in her hair with a diamond in the centre, and she attracts every eye for a whole evening. Another revives the hair net, or sticks a dagger through the twist to suggest a garter. This one wears velvet bands round her wrists, that one appears in lace lippets. These valiant efforts, an Austerlitz of vanity or of love, then set the fashion for lower spheres by the time the inventive creatress has originated something new. This evening, which Valerie meant to be a success for her, she had placed 3 patches. She had washed her hair with some lye, which changed its hue for a few days from a gold color to a duller shade. Madame Steinbock's was almost red, and she would be in every point unlike her. This new effect gave her a piquant and strange appearance, which puzzled her followers so much that Montes asked her, "What have you done to yourself this evening?" Then she put on a rather wide black velvet neck ribbon, which showed off the whiteness of her skin. One patch took the place of the assassine of our grandmothers, and Valerie pinned the sweetest rosebud into her bodice, just in the middle above the stay busk, and in the daintiest little hollow. It was enough to make every man under 30 drop his eyelids. "I am as sweet as a sugar plum," said she to herself, going through her attitudes before the glass, exactly as a dancer practises her curtsies. Lisbeth had been to market, and the dinner was to be one of those superfine meals which Mathurine had been wont to cook for her bishop when he entertained the prelate of the adjoining diocese. Stidmann, Claude Vignon, and Count Steinbock arrived almost together, just at 6. An ordinary, or, if you will, a natural woman, would have hastened at the announcement of a name so eagerly longed for, but Valerie, though ready since 5 o'clock, remained in her room, leaving her 3 guests together, certain that she was the subject of their conversation or of their secret thoughts. She herself had arranged the drawing-room, laying out the pretty trifles produced in Paris and nowhere else, which reveal the woman and announce her presence: albums bound in enamel or embroidered with beads, saucers full of pretty rings, marvels of Sèvres or Dresden mounted exquisitely by Florent and Chanor, statues, books, all the frivolities which cost insane sums, and which passion orders of the makers in its first delirium, or to patch up its last quarrel. Besides, Valerie was in the state of intoxication that comes of triumph. She had promised to marry Crevel if Marneffe should die, and the amorous Crevel had transferred to the name of Valerie Fortin bonds bearing 10,000 francs a year, the sum total of what he had made in railway speculations during the past 3 years, the returns on the capital of 100,000 crowns, which he had at first offered to the Baronne Hulot. So Valerie now had an income of 32,000 francs. Crevel had just committed himself to a promise of far greater magnitude than this gift of his surplus. In the paroxysm of rapture which his Duchess had given him from 2 to 4, he gave this fine title to Madame de Marneffe to complete the illusion, for Valerie had surpassed herself in the Rue du Dauphin that afternoon. He had thought well to encourage her in her promised fidelity by giving her the prospect of a certain little mansion, built in the Rue Barbette by an imprudent contractor who now wanted to sell it. Valerie could already see herself in this delightful residence, with a forecourt and a garden, and keeping a carriage. What respectable life can ever procure so much in so short a time, or so easily? Said she to Lisbeth as she finished dressing. Lisbeth was to dine with Valerie that evening, to tell Steinbock those things about the lady which nobody can say about herself. Madame Marneffe, radiant with satisfaction, came into the drawing-room with modest grace, followed by Lisbeth, dressed in black and yellow to set her off. "Good evening, Claude," said she, giving her hand to the famous old critic. Claude Vignon, like many another, had become a political personage, a word describing an ambitious man at the first stage of his career. The political personage of 1840 represents in some degree the Abbé of the 18th century. No drawing-room circle is complete without one. "My dear, this is my cousin, Count Steinbock," said Lisbeth, introducing Wenceslas, whom Valerie seemed to have overlooked. "Oh yes, I recognize Monsieur le Comte," replied Valerie with a gracious bow to the artist. "I often saw you in the Rue du Doyenne, and I had the pleasure of being present at your wedding. It would be difficult, my dear," said she to Lisbeth, "to forget your adopted son after once seeing him. It is most kind of you, Monsieur Stidmann," she went on, "to have accepted my invitation at such short notice, but necessity knows no law. I knew you to be the friend of both these gentlemen. Nothing is more dreary, more sulky than a dinner where all the guests are strangers, so it was for their sake that I hailed you in. But you will come another time for mine, I hope. Say that you will." And for a few minutes she moved about the room with Stidmann, wholly occupied with him. Crevel and Hulot were announced separately, and then a deputy named Beauvisage. This individual, a provincial Crevel, one of the men created to make up the crowd in the world, voted under the banner of Giraud, a State Councillor, and Victorin Hulot. These two politicians were trying to form a nucleus of progressives in the loose array of the Conservative party. Giraud himself occasionally spent the evening at Madame Marneffe's, and she flattered herself that she should also capture Victorin Hulot. But the puritanical lawyer had hitherto found excuses for refusing to accompany his father and father-in-law. It seemed to him criminal to be seen in the house of the woman who cost his mother so many tears. Victorin Hulot was to the Puritans of political life what a pious woman is among bigots. Beauvisage, formerly a stocking manufacturer at Arcy, was anxious to pick up the Paris style. This man, one of the outer stones of the chamber, was forming himself under the auspices of this delicious and fascinating Madame Marneffe. Introduced here by Crevel, he had accepted him, at her instigation, as his model and master. He consulted him on every point, took the address of his tailor, imitated him, and tried to strike the same attitudes. In short, Crevel was his great man. Valerie, surrounded by these bigwigs and the three artists, and supported by Lisbeth, struck Wenceslas as a really superior woman, all the more so because Claude Vignon spoke of her like a man in love. "She is Madame de Maintenon in Ninon's petticoats," said the veteran critic. "You may please her in an evening if you have the wit, but as for making her love you, that would be a triumph to crown a man's ambition and fill up his life." Valerie, while seeming cold and heedless of her former neighbor, piqued his vanity, quite unconsciously indeed, for she knew nothing of the Polish character. There is in the Slav a childish element, as there is in all these primitively wild nations which have overflowed into civilization, rather than that they have become civilized. The race has spread like an inundation, and has covered a large portion of the globe. It inhabits deserts whose extent is so vast that it expands at its ease. There is no jostling there, as there is in Europe, and civilization is impossible without the constant friction of minds and interests. The Ukraine, Russia, the plains by the Danube, in short, the Slav nations, are a connecting link between Europe and Asia, between civilization and barbarism. Thus the Pole, the wealthiest member of the Slav family, has in his character all the childishness and inconsistency of a beardless race. He has courage, spirit, and strength, but, cursed with instability, that courage, strength, and energy have neither method nor guidance. For the Pole displays a variability resembling that of the winds which blow across that vast plain broken with swamps. And though he has the impetuosity of the snow squalls that wrench and sweep away buildings, Like those aerial avalanches, he is lost in the first pool and melts into water. Man always assimilates something from the surroundings in which he lives. Perpetually at strife with the Turk, the Pole has imbibed a taste for Oriental splendor. He often sacrifices what is needful for the sake of display. The men dress themselves out like women, yet the climate has given them the tough constitution of Arabs. The Pole, sublime in suffering, has tired his oppressor's arms by sheer endurance of beating, and in the 19th century has reproduced the spectacle presented by the early Christians. Infuse only 10% of English cautiousness into the frank and open Polish nature, and the magnanimous white eagle would at this day be supreme wherever the two-headed eagle has sneaked in. A little Machiavellism would have hindered Poland from helping to save Austria, who has taken a share of it, from borrowing from Prussia, the usurer who had undermined it, and from breaking up as soon as a division was first made. At the christening of Poland, no doubt, the fairy Carabosse, overlooked by the genii who endowed that attractive people with the most brilliant gifts, came in to say, "Keep all the gifts that my sisters have bestowed on you, but you shall never know what you wish for." If in its heroic duel with Russia, Poland had won the day, the Poles would now be fighting among themselves, as they formerly fought in their diets to hinder each other from being chosen king. When that nation, composed entirely of hot-headed daredevils, has good sense enough to seek a Louis XVI among her own offspring, to accept his despotism and a dynasty, she will be saved. What Poland has been politically, almost every Pole is in private life, especially under the stress of disaster. Thus, Wenceslas Steinbock, after worshipping his wife for 3 years, and knowing that he was a god to her, was so much nettled at finding himself barely noticed by Madame Marneffe, that he made it a point of honor to attract her attention. He compared Valerie with his wife, and gave her the palm. Hortense was beautiful flesh, as Valerie had said to Lisbeth, but Madame Marneffe had spirit in her very shape, and the savor of vice. Such devotion as Hortense's is a feeling which a husband takes as his due. The sense of the immense preciousness of such perfect love soon wears off, as a debtor in the course of time begins to fancy that the borrowed money is his own. This noble loyalty becomes the daily bread of the soul, and an infidelity is as tempting as a dainty. The woman who is scornful, and yet more the woman who is reputed dangerous, excites curiosity, as spices add flavor to good food. Indeed, the disdain so cleverly acted by Valerie was a novelty to Wenceslas, after 3 years of too easy enjoyment. Hortense was a wife, Valerie a mistress. Many men desire to have 2 editions of the same work, though it is in fact a proof of inferiority when a man cannot make his mistress of his wife. Variety in this particular is a sign of weakness. Constancy will always be the real genius of love, the evidence of immense power, the power that makes the poet. A man ought to find every woman in his wife, as the squalid poets of the 17th century made their Manons figure as Iris and Chloe. "Well," said Lisbeth to the Pole, as she beheld him fascinated, "what do you think of Valerie?" "She is too charming," replied Wenceslas. "You would not listen to me," said Betty. "Oh, my little Wenceslas, if you and I had never parted, you would have been that siren's lover; you might have married her when she was a widow, and you would have had her 40,000 francs a year." "Really?" "Certainly," replied Lisbeth. "Now take care of yourself. I warned you of the danger. Do not singe your wings in the candle. Come, give me your arm. Dinner is served." No language could be so thoroughly demoralizing as this, for if you show a Pole a precipice, he is bound to leap it. As a nation, they have the very spirit of cavalry, They fancy they can ride down every obstacle and come out victorious. The spur applied by Lisbeth to Steinbock's vanity was intensified by the appearance of the dining room. Bright with handsome silver plate, the dinner was served with every refinement and extravagance of Parisian luxury. "I should have done better to take Célimène," thought he to himself. All through the dinner Hulot was charming, pleased to see his son-in-law at that table, and yet more happy in the prospect of a reconciliation with Valerie, whose fidelity he proposed to secure by the promise of Coquet's head clerkship. Stidmann responded to the Baron's amiability by shafts of Parisian banter and an artist's high spirits. Steinbock would not allow himself to be eclipsed by his friend. He, too, was witty, said amusing things, made his mark, and was pleased with himself. Madame Marneffe smiled at him several times to show that she quite understood him. The good meal and heady wines completed the work. Wenceslas was deep in what must be called the slough of dissipation. Excited by just a glass too much, he stretched himself on a settee after dinner, sunk in physical and mental ecstasy, which Madame Marneffe wrought to the highest pitch by coming to sit down by him, airy, scented, pretty enough to damn an angel. She bent over Wenceslas and almost touched his ear as she whispered to him: "We cannot talk over business matters this evening unless you will remain till the last. Between us, you, Lisbeth, and me, we can settle everything to suit you." "Ah, madame, you are an angel," replied Wenceslas, also in a murmur. "I was a pretty fool not to listen to Lisbeth." "What did she say?" "She declared in the Rue de Doyenne that you loved me." Madame Marneffe looked at him, seemed covered with confusion, and hastily left her seat. A young and pretty woman never rouses the hope of immediate success with impunity. This retreat, the impulse of a virtuous woman who is crushing a passion in the depths of her heart, was 1,000 times more effective than the most reckless avowal. Desire was so thoroughly aroused in Wenceslas that he doubled his attentions to Valerie. A woman seen by all is a woman wished for. Hence the terrible power of actresses. Madame Marneffe, knowing that she was watched, behaved like an admired actress. She was quite charming, and her success was immense. "I no longer wonder at my father-in-law's follies," said Steinbock to Lisbeth. "If you say such things, Wenceslas, I shall to my dying day repent of having got you the loan of these 10,000 francs. Are you, like all these men," and she indicated the guests, "madly in love with that creature? Remember, you would be your father-in-law's rival, and think of the misery you would bring on Hortense." "That is true," said Wenceslas. "Hortense is an angel. I should be a wretch." "And one is enough in the family," said Lisbeth. "Artists ought never to marry," exclaimed Steinbock. "Ah, that is what I always told you in the Rue du Doyenne. Your groups, your statues, your great works ought to be your children." "What are you talking about?" Valerie asked, joining Lisbeth. "Give us tea, cousin." Steinbock, with Polish vainglory, wanted to appear familiar with this drawing-room fairy. After defying Stidmann, Vignon, and Crevel with a look, he took Valerie's hand and forced her to sit down by him on the settee. "You are rather too lordly, Count Steinbock," said she, resisting a little; but she laughed as she dropped on to the seat, not without arranging the rosebud pinned into her bodice. "Alas, if I were really lordly," said he, "I should not be here to borrow money." "Poor boy! I remember how you worked all night in the Rue de Doyenne. You really were rather a spooney. You married as a starving man snatches a loaf. You knew nothing of Paris, and you see where you are landed. But you turned a deaf ear to Lisbeth's devotion, as you did to the love of a woman who knows her Paris by heart." "Say no more," cried Steinbock. "I am done for." "You shall have your 10,000 francs, my dear Wenceslas, but on one condition," she went on, playing with his handsome curls. "What is that?" "I will take no interest. "Madame! Oh, you need not be indignant. You shall make it good by giving me a bronze group. You began the story of Samson. Finish it. Do a Delilah cutting off the Jewish Hercules' hair. And you, who, if you will listen to me, will be a great artist, must enter into the subject. What you have to show is the power of woman. Samson is a secondary consideration. He is the corpse of dead strength. It is Delilah, passion, that ruins everything. How far more beautiful is that replica? That is what you call it, I think?" She skilfully interpolated as Claude Vignon and Stidmann came up to them on hearing her talk of sculpture. "How far more beautiful than the Greek myth is that replica of Hercules at Omphale's feet. Did Greece copy Judea, or did Judea borrow the symbolism from Greece?" "There, madam, you raise an important question, that of the date of the various writings in the Bible. The great and immortal Spinoza, most foolishly ranked as an atheist, whereas he gave mathematical proof of the existence of God, asserts that the book of Genesis and all the political history of the Bible are of the time of Moses, and he demonstrates the interpolated passages by philological evidence, and he was thrice stabbed as he went into the synagogue." "I had no idea I was so learned," said Valerie, annoyed at this interruption to her tete a tete. "Women know everything by instinct," replied Claude Vignon. "Well, then, you promise me?" she said to Steinbock, taking his hand with the timidity of a girl in love. "You are indeed a happy man, my dear fellow," cried Stidmann, "if madame asks a favor of you." "What is it?" asked Claude Vignon. "A small bronze group," replied Steinbock. "Delilah cutting off Samson's hair." "It is difficult," remarked Vignon. "A bed—" "On the contrary, it is exceedingly easy," replied Valerie, smiling. "Aha! Teach us sculpture," said Stidmann. "You should take madame for your subject," replied Vignon, with a keen glance at Valerie. "Well," she went on, "this is my notion of the composition. Samson on waking finds he has no hair, like many a dandy with a false topknot. The hero is sitting on the bed, so you need only show the foot of it, covered with hangings and drapery. There he is, like Marius among the ruins of Carthage, his arms folded, his head shaven. Napoleon at St. Helena, what you will. Delilah is on her knees, a good deal like Canova's Magdalen. When a hussy has ruined her man, she adores him. As I see it, the Jewess was afraid of Samson in his strength and terrors, but she must have loved him when she saw him a child again. So Delilah is bewailing her sin; she would like to give her lover his hair again. She hardly dares to look at him, but she does look, with a smile, for she reads forgiveness in Samson's weakness. Such a group as this, and one of the ferocious Judith, would epitomize woman. Virtue cuts off your head, vice only cuts off your hair. Take care of your wigs, gentlemen." And she left the artists quite overpowered to sing her praises in concert with the critic. "It is impossible to be more bewitching," cried Stidmann. "Oh, she is the most intelligent and desirable woman I have ever met," said Claude Vignon. "Such a combination of beauty and cleverness is so rare." "And if you, who had the honor of being intimate with Camille Maupin, can pronounce such a verdict," replied Stidmann, "what are we to think?" "If you will make your Delilah a portrait of Valerie, my dear Count," said Crevel, who had risen for a moment from the card table and who had heard what had been said, "I will give you 1,000 crowns for an example. Yes, by the powers, I will shell out to the tune of 1,000 crowns." "Shell out? What does that mean?" asked Beauvisage of Claude Vignon. "Madame must do me the honor to sit for it, then," said Steinbock to Crevel. "Ask her." At this moment Valerie herself brought Steinbock a cup of tea. This was more than a compliment, it was a favor. There is a complete language in the manner in which a woman does this little civility, but women are fully aware of the fact, and it is a curious thing to study their movements, their manner, their look, tone, and accent when they perform this apparently simple act of politeness. From the question, "Do you take tea? Will you have some tea? A cup of tea?" coldly asked, and followed by instructions to the nymph of the urn to bring it, to the eloquent poem of the odalisque coming from the tea-table, cup in hand, towards the pasha of her heart, presenting it submissively, offering it in an insinuating voice, with a look full of intoxicating promises, a physiologist could deduce the whole scale of feminine emotion, from aversion or indifference to Phaedra's declaration to Hippolytus. Women can make it, at will, contemptuous to the verge of insult, or humble to the expression of oriental servility. And Valerie was more than woman; she was the serpent made woman. She crowned her diabolical work by going up to Steinbock, a cup of tea in her hand. "I will drink as many cups of tea as you will give me," said the artist, murmuring in her ear as he rose, and touching her fingers with his, "to have them given to me thus." "What were you saying about sitting?" said she, without betraying that this declaration, so frantically desired, had gone straight to her heart. "Old Crevel promises me 1,000 crowns for a copy of your group." "He? 1,000 crowns for a bronze group?" "Yes, if you will sit for Delilah," said Steinbock. "He will not be there to see, I hope," replied she. "The group would be worth more than all his fortune, for Delilah's costume is rather undressy." Just as Crevel loved to strike an attitude, every woman has a victorious gesture, a studied movement, which she knows must win admiration. You may see in a drawing room how one spends all her time looking down at her tucker, or pulling up the shoulder piece of her gown; how another makes play with the brightness of her eyes by glancing up at the cornice. Madame Marneffe's triumph, however, was not face to face like that of other women. She turned sharply round to return to Lisbeth at the tea-table. This ballet dancer's pirouette, whisking her skirts, by which she had overthrown Hulot, now fascinated Steinbock. "Your vengeance is secure," said Valerie to Lisbeth in a whisper. "Hortense will cry out all her tears, and curse the day when she robbed you of Wenceslas. Till I am Madame la Marechale, I shall not think myself successful," replied the cousin. "But they are all beginning to wish for it. This morning I went to Victorin's. I forgot to tell you. The young Hulots have bought up their father's notes of hand given to Vauvinet, and to morrow they will endorse a bill for 72,000 francs at 5%, payable in 3 years, and secured by a mortgage on their house. So the young people are in straits for 3 years; they can raise no more money on that property. Victorin is dreadfully distressed; he understands his father. And Crevel is capable of refusing to see them, he will be so angry at this piece of self-sacrifice." "The Baron cannot have a sou now," said Valerie, and she smiled at Hulot. "I don't see where he can get it, but he will draw his salary again in September. And he has his policy of insurance, he has renewed it. Come, it is high time he should get Marneffe promoted. I will drive it home this evening." "My dear cousin," said Lisbeth to Wenceslas, "go home, I beg. You are quite ridiculous. Your eyes are fixed on Valerie in a way that is enough to compromise her, and her husband is insanely jealous. Do not tread in your father in law's footsteps. Go home. I am sure Hortense is sitting up for you." "Madame Marneffe told me to stay till the last to settle my little business with you and her," replied Wenceslas. "No, no," said Lisbeth, "I will bring you the 10,000 francs, for her husband has his eye on you. It would be rash to remain. To morrow, at 11 o'clock, bring your note of hand. At that hour that Mandarin Marneffe is at his office. Valerie is free. Have you really asked her to sit for your group? Come up to my rooms first. Ah, I was sure of it," she added as she caught the look which Steinbock flashed at Valerie. "I knew you were a profligate in the bud. Well, Valerie is lovely, but try not to bring trouble on Hortense." Nothing annoys a married man so much as finding his wife perpetually interposing between himself and his wishes, however transient. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Cousin Betty by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by James Waring. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 23. Wenceslas got home at about 1 in the morning. Hortense had expected him ever since 9:30. From 9:30 till 10 she had listened to the passing carriages, telling herself that never before had her husband come in so late from dining with Florent and Chanor. She sat sewing by the child's cot, for she had begun to save a needlewoman's pay for the day by doing the mending herself. From 10 till 9:30 a suspicion crossed her mind. She sat wondering, "Is he really gone to dinner, as he told me, with Chanor and Florent? He put on his best cravat and his handsomest pin when he dressed. He took as long over his toilet as a woman when she wants to make the best of herself. I am crazy. He loves me, and here he is." But instead of stopping, the cab she heard went past. From 11 till midnight Hortense was a victim to terrible alarms. The quarter where they lived was now deserted. "If he has set out on foot, some accident may have happened," thought she. "A man may be killed by tumbling over a curbstone or failing to see a gap. Artists are so heedless. Or if he should have been stopped by robbers. It is the first time he has ever left me alone here for 6 hours and a half. But why should I worry myself? He cares for no one but me." Men ought to be faithful to the wives who love them, were it only on account of the perpetual miracles wrought by true love in the sublime regions of the spiritual world. The woman who loves is, in relation to the man she loves, in the position of a somnambulist to whom the magnetizer should give the painful power, when she ceases to be the mirror of the world, of being conscious as a woman of what she has seen as a somnambulist. Passion raises the nervous tension of a woman to the ecstatic pitch at which presentiment is as acute as the insight of a clairvoyant. A wife knows she is betrayed. She will not let herself say so, she doubts still, she loves so much. She gives the lie to the outcry of her own Pythian power. This paroxysm of love deserves a special form of worship. In noble souls, admiration of this divine phenomenon will always be a safeguard to protect them from infidelity. How should a man not worship a beautiful and intellectual creature whose soul can soar to such manifestations? By 1 in the morning, Hortense was in a state of such intense anguish that she flew to the door as she recognized her husband's ring at the bell, and clasped him in her arms like a mother. "At last, here you are!" cried she, finding her voice again. "My dearest, henceforth where you go, I go, for I cannot again endure the torture of such waiting. I pictured you stumbling over a curbstone with a fractured skull, killed by thieves. No, a second time I know I should go mad. Have you enjoyed yourself so much, and without me? Bad boy!" "What can I say, my darling? There was Bixiou, who drew fresh caricatures for us; Léon de Lora, as witty as ever; Claude Vignon, to whom I owe the only consolatory article that has come out about the Montcornet statue. There were—" "Were there no ladies?" Hortense eagerly inquired. "Worthy Madame Florent?" "You said the Rocher de Cancale. Were you at the Florents'?" "Yes, at their house. I made a mistake." "You did not take a coach to come home?" "No." "And you have walked from the Rue des Tournelles?" "Stidmann and Bixiou came back with me along the boulevards as far as the Madeleine, talking all the way." "It is dry, then, on the boulevards, and the Place de la Concorde, and the Rue de Bourgogne? You are not muddy at all?" said Hortense, looking at her husband's patent leather boots. It had been raining, but between the Rue Vanneau and the Rue Saint Dominique Wenceslas had not got his boots soiled. Here are 5,000 francs Chanor has been so generous as to lend me," said Wenceslas to cut short this lawyer-like examination. He had made a division of the 10,000-franc notes, half for Hortense and half for himself, for he had 5,000 francs worth of debts, of which Hortense knew nothing. He owed money to his foreman and his workmen. "Now your anxieties are relieved," said he, kissing his wife. "I am going to work to-morrow morning, so I am going to bed this minute, to get up early, by your leave, my pet." The suspicion that had dawned in Hortense's mind vanished. She was miles away from the truth. Madame Marneffe? She had never thought of her. Her fear for her Wenceslas was that he should fall in with street prostitutes. The names of Bixiou and Léon de Lora, two artists noted for their wild dissipations, had alarmed her. Next morning she saw Wenceslas go out at 9 o'clock, and was quite reassured. "Now he is at work again," said she to herself, as she proceeded to dress her boy. "I see he is quite in the vein. Well, well, if we cannot have the glory of Michelangelo, we may have that of Benvenuto Cellini." Lulled by her own hopes, Hortense believed in a happy future, and she was chattering to her son of 20 months, in the language of onomatopoeia that amuses babies, when, at about 11 o'clock, the cook, who had not seen Wenceslas go out, showed in Stidmann. "I beg pardon, madame," said he. "Is Wenceslas gone out already?" "He is at the studio." "I came to talk over the work with him." "I will send for him," said Hortense, offering Stidmann a chair. Thanking Heaven for this piece of luck, Hortense was glad to detain Stidmann to ask some questions about the evening before. Stidmann bowed in acknowledgment of her kindness. The Countess Steinbock rang, the cook appeared, and was desired to go at once and fetch her master from the studio. "You had an amusing dinner last night," said Hortense. "Wenceslas did not come in till past 1 in the morning." "Amusing? Not exactly," replied the artist, who had intended to fascinate Madame Marneffe. "Society is not very amusing unless one is interested in it. That little Madame Marneffe is clever, but a great flirt." "And what did Wenceslas think of her?" asked poor Hortense, trying to keep calm. "He said nothing about her to me." "I will only say one thing," said Stidmann, "and that is, that I think her a very dangerous woman." Hortense turned as pale as a woman after childbirth. "So it was at Madame Marneffe's that you dined, and not with Chanor?" said she. "Yesterday, and Wenceslas, and he—" Stidmann, without knowing what mischief he had done, saw that he had blundered. The Countess did not finish her sentence; she simply fainted away. The artist rang, and the maid came in. When Louise tried to get her mistress into her bedroom, a serious nervous attack came on, with violent hysterics. Stidmann, like any man who by an involuntary indiscretion has overthrown the structure built on a husband's lie to his wife, could not conceive that his words should produce such an effect. He supposed that the Countess was in such delicate health that the slightest contradiction was mischievous. The cook presently returned to say, unfortunately in loud tones, that her master was not in the studio. In the midst of her anguish, Hortense heard, and the hysterical fit came on again. "Go and fetch madame's mother," said Louise to the cook. "Quick, run!" "If I knew where to find Steinbock, I would go and fetch him," exclaimed Stidmann in despair. "He is with that woman!" cried the unhappy wife. "He was not dressed to go to his work." Stidmann hurried off to Madame Marneffe's, struck by the truth of this conclusion, due to the second sight of passion. At that moment, Valerie was posed as Delilah. Stidmann, too sharp to ask for Madame Marneffe, walked straight in past the lodge and ran quickly up to the second floor, arguing thus: "If I ask for Madame Marneffe, she will be out. If I inquire point blank for Steinbock, I shall be laughed at to my face. Take the bull by the horns." Reine appeared in answer to his ring. "Tell Monsieur le Comte Steinbock to come at once; his wife is dying." Reine, quite a match for Stidmann, looked at him with blank surprise. "But, sir, I don't know. Did you suppose I tell you that my friend Monsieur Steinbock is here. His wife is very ill. It is quite serious enough for you to disturb your mistress." And Stidmann turned on his heel. "He is there, sure enough," said he to himself. And in point of fact, after waiting a few minutes in the Rue Vanneau, he saw Wenceslas come out, and beckoned to him to come quickly. After telling him of the tragedy enacted in the Rue Saint Dominique, Stidmann scolded Steinbock for not having warned him to keep the secret of yesterday's dinner. "I am done for," said Wenceslas, "but you are forgiven. I had totally forgotten that you were to call this morning, and I blundered in not telling you that we were to have dined with Florent. What can I say? That Valerie has turned my head; but, my dear fellow, for her glory is well lost, misfortune well won. She really is. Good heavens! But I am in a dreadful fix. Advise me. What can I say? How can I excuse myself?" "I advise you? I don't know," replied Stidmann. "But your wife loves you, I imagine. Well, then, she will believe anything. Tell her that you were on your way to me when I was on my way to you. That, at any rate, will set this morning's business right. Good bye." Lisbeth, called down by Reine, ran after Wenceslas and caught him up at the corner of the Rue Hillerin-Bertin. She was afraid of his Polish artlessness. Not wishing to be involved in the matter, she said a few words to Wenceslas, who, in his joy, hugged her then and there. She had no doubt pushed out a plank to enable the artist to cross this awkward place in his conjugal affairs. At the sight of her mother, who had flown to her aid, Hortense burst into floods of tears. This happily changed the character of the hysterical attack. "Treachery, dear mamma!" cried she. "Wenceslas, after giving me his word of honor that he would not go near Madame Marneffe, dined with her last night, and did not come in till 1:15 in the morning. If you only knew! The day before we had had a discussion, not a quarrel, and I had appealed to him so touchingly. I told him I was jealous, that I should die if he were unfaithful, that I was easily suspicious, but that he ought to have some consideration for my weaknesses as they came of my love for him, that I had my father's blood in my veins as well as yours, that at the first moment of such discovery I should be mad, and capable of mad deeds, of avenging myself, of dishonoring us all, him, his child, and myself, that I might even kill him first, and myself after, and so on. And yet he went there, he is there. That woman is bent on breaking all our hearts. Only yesterday my brother and Celestine pledged their all to pay off 70,000 francs on notes of hand, signed for that good-for-nothing creature. Yes, mamma, my father would have been arrested and put into prison. Cannot that dreadful woman be content with having my father and with all your tears? Why take my Wenceslas? I will go to see her and stab her." Madame Hulot, struck to the heart by the dreadful secrets Hortense was unwittingly letting out, controlled her grief by one of the heroic efforts which a magnanimous mother can make, and drew her daughter's head onto her bosom to cover it with kisses. "Wait for Wenceslas, my child; all will be explained. The evil cannot be so great as you picture it. I, too, have been deceived, my dear Hortense. You think me handsome; I have lived blameless. And yet I have been utterly forsaken for 23 years, for a Jenny Cadine, a Josepha, a Madame Marneffe. Did you know that?" "You, mamma, you? You have endured this for 20—" She broke off, staggered by her own thoughts. "Do as I have done, my child," said her mother. "Be gentle and kind, and your conscience will be at peace. On his deathbed a man may say, 'My wife has never cost me a pang,' and God, who hears that dying breath, credits it to us. If I had abandoned myself to fury like you, what would have happened? Your father would have been embittered, perhaps he should have left me altogether, and he would not have been withheld by any fear of paining me. Our ruin, utter as it now is, would have been complete 10 years sooner. and we should have shown the world the spectacle of a husband and wife living quite apart, a scandal of the most horrible, heart-breaking kind, for it is the destruction of the family. Neither your brother nor you could have married. I sacrificed myself, and that so bravely that, till this last connection of your father's, the world has believed me happy. My serviceable and indeed courageous falsehood has, till now, screened Hector. He is still respected, but this old man's passion is taking him too far, that I see. His own folly, I fear, will break through the veil I have kept between the world and our home. However, I have held that curtain steady for 23 years, and have wept behind it. Motherless I, without a friend to trust, with no help but in religion, I have for 23 years secured the family honor." Hortense listened with a fixed gaze. The calm tone of resignation and of such crowning sorrow soothed the smart of her first wound. The tears rose again and flowed in torrents. In a frenzy of filial affection, overcome by her mother's noble heroism, she fell on her knees before Adeline, took up the hem of her dress and kissed it, as pious Catholics kiss the holy relics of a martyr. "Nay, get up, Hortense," said the Baroness. "Such homage from my own daughter wipes out many sad memories. Come to my heart, and weep for no sorrows but your own. It is the despair of my little girl, whose joy was my only joy, that broke the solemn seal which nothing ought to have removed from my lips. Indeed, I meant to have taken my woes to the tomb as a shroud the more. It was to soothe your anguish that I spoke. God will forgive me. Oh, if my life were to be your life, what would I not do? Men, the world, fate, nature, God himself, I believe, make us pay for love with the most cruel grief. I must pay for 10 years of happiness, and 24 years of despair, of ceaseless sorrow, of bitterness." "But you had 10 years, dear mamma, and I have had but 3," said the self-absorbed girl. "Nothing is lost yet," said Adeline. "Only wait till Wenceslas comes." "Mother," said she, "he lied, he deceived me. He said, 'I will not go,' and he went, and that over his child's cradle." "For pleasure, my child, men will commit the most cowardly, the most infamous actions, even crimes. It lies in their nature, it would seem. We wives are set apart for sacrifice. I believed my troubles were ended, and they are beginning again, for I never thought to suffer doubly by suffering with my child. Courage and silence, my Hortense, swear that you will never discuss your griefs with anybody but me, never let them be suspected by any third person. Oh, be as proud as your mother has been." Hortense started; she had heard her husband's step. "So it would seem," said Wenceslas as he came in, "that Stidmann has been here while I went to see him." "Indeed," said Hortense, with the angry irony of an offended woman who uses words to stab. "Certainly," said Wenceslas, affecting surprise. "We have just met." "And yesterday?" "Well, yesterday I deceived you, my darling love, and your mother shall judge between us." This candor unlocked his wife's heart. All really lofty women like the truth better than lies. They cannot bear to see their idol smirched. They want to be proud of the despotism they bow to. There is a strain of this feeling in the devotion of the Russians to their Czar. "Now listen, dear mother," Wenceslas went on. "I so truly love my sweet and kind Hortense that I concealed from her the extent of our poverty. What could I do? She was still nursing the boy, and such troubles would have done her harm. You know what the risk is for a woman. Her beauty, youth, and health are imperiled. Did I do wrong? She believes that we owe 5,000 francs, but I owe 5,000 more. The day before yesterday we were in the depths. No one on earth will lend to us artists. Our talents are not less untrustworthy than our whims. I knocked in vain at every door. Lisbeth, indeed, offered us her savings." "Poor soul!" said Hortense. "Poor soul!" said the Baroness. But what are Lisbeth's 2,000 francs? Everything to her, nothing to us. Then, as you know, Hortense, she spoke to us of Madame Marneffe, who, as she owes so much to the Baron, out of a sense of honor, will take no interest. Hortense wanted to send her diamonds to the Mont de Piété. They would have brought in a few thousand francs, but we needed 10,000. Those 10,000 francs were to be had, free of interest, for a year. I said to myself, Hortense will be none the wiser, I will go and get them. Then the woman asked me to dinner through my father-in-law, giving me to understand that Lisbeth had spoken of the matter, and I should have the money. Between Hortense's despair on one hand and the dinner on the other, I could not hesitate. That is all. What, could Hortense, at 24, lovely, pure, and virtuous, and all my pride and glory, imagine that when I have never left her since we married, I could now prefer what? A tawny, painted, ruddled creature? Said he, using the vulgar exaggeration of the studio to convince his wife by the vehemence that women like. "Oh, if only your father had ever spoken so!" cried the Baroness. Hortense threw her arms round her husband's neck. "Yes, that is what I should have done," said her mother. "Wenceslas, my dear fellow, your wife was near dying of it," she went on very seriously. "You see how well she loves you, and alas, she is yours." She sighed deeply. "He may make a martyr of her, or a happy woman," thought she to herself, as every mother thinks when she sees her daughter married. "It seems to me," she said aloud, "that I am miserable enough to hope to see my children happy." "Be quite easy, dear mamma," said Wenceslas, only too glad to see this critical moment end happily. "In 2 months I shall have repaid that dreadful woman. How could I help it?" he went on, repeating this essentially Polish excuse with a Pole's grace. "There are times when a man would borrow of the devil. And after all, the money belongs to the family. When once she had invited me, should I have got the money at all if I had responded to her civility with a rude refusal?" "Oh, mamma, what mischief papa is bringing on us!" cried Hortense. The Baroness laid her finger on her daughter's lips, aggrieved by this complaint, the first blame she had ever uttered of a father so heroically screened by her mother's magnanimous silence. "Now, good bye, my children," said Madame Hulot. "The storm is over, but do not quarrel any more." When Wenceslas and his wife returned to their room, after letting out the Baroness, Hortense said to her husband, "Tell me all about last evening." And she watched his face all through the narrative, interrupting him by the questions that crowd on a wife's mind in such circumstances. The story made Hortense reflect. She had a glimpse of the infernal dissipation which an artist must find in such vicious company. "Be honest, my Wenceslas. Stidmann was there, Claude Vignon, Vernisset, who else? In short, it was good fun?" I was thinking of nothing but our 10,000 francs, and I was saying to myself, my Hortense will be freed from anxiety." This catechism bored the Livonian excessively. He seized a gayer moment to say, "And you, my dearest, what would you have done if your artist had proved guilty?" "I," said she, with an air of prompt decision, "I should have taken up Stidmann, not that I love him, of course." "Hortense!" cried Steinbock, starting to his feet with a sudden and theatrical emphasis. "You would not have had the chance. I would have killed you." Hortense threw herself into his arms, clasping him closely enough to stifle him, and covered him with kisses, saying, "Ah, you do love me! I fear nothing. But no more Marneffe. Never go plunging into such horrible bogs." "I swear to you, dear Hortense, that I will go there no more, excepting to redeem my note of hand." She pouted at this, but only as a loving woman sulks to get something for it. Wenceslas, tired out with such a morning's work, went off to his studio to make a clay sketch of the Samson and Delilah, for which he had the drawings in his pocket. Hortense, penitent for her little temper, and fancying that her husband was annoyed with her, went to the studio just as the sculptor had finished handling the clay, with the impetuosity that spurs an artist when the mood is on him. On seeing his wife, Wenceslas hastily threw the wet wrapper over the group, and putting both arms round her, he said, "We were not really angry, were we, my pretty puss?" Hortense had caught sight of the group, had seen the linen thrown over it, and had said nothing; but as she was leaving, she took off the rag, looked at the model, and asked, "What is that?" "A group for which I had just had an idea." "And why did you hide it?" "I did not mean you to see it till it was finished." "The woman is very pretty," said Hortense. And 1,000 suspicions cropped up in her mind, as, in India, tall rank plants spring up in a night time. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Cousin Betty by Honoré de Balzac, translated by James Waring. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 24. By the end of 3 weeks, Madame Marneffe was intensely irritated by Hortense. Women of that stamp have a pride of their own. They insist that men shall kiss the devil's hoof. They have no forgiveness for the virtue that does not quail before their dominion, or that even holds its own against them. Now, in all that time, Wenceslas had not paid one visit in the Rue Vanneau, not even that which politeness required to a woman who had sat for Delilah. Whenever Lisbeth called on the Steinbocks, there had been nobody at home. Monsieur and Madame lived in the studio. Lisbeth, following the turtle doves to their nest at Le Gros Caillou, found Wenceslas hard at work, and was informed by the cook that Madame never left Monsieur's side. Wenceslas was a slave to the autocracy of love. So now Valerie, on her own account, took part with Lisbeth in her hatred of Hortense. Women cling to a lover that another woman is fighting for, just as much as men do to women round whom many coxcombs are buzzing. Thus any reflections apropos to Madame Marneffe are equally applicable to any lady-killing rake. He is, in fact, a sort of male courtesan. Valerie's last fancy was a madness. Above all, she was bent on getting her group. She was even thinking of going one morning to the studio to see Wenceslas, when a serious incident arose of the kind which, to a woman of that class, may be called the spoil of war. This is how Valerie announced this wholly personal event. She was breakfasting with Lisbeth and her husband. "I say, Marneffe, what would you say to being a second time a father?" "You don't mean it? A baby? Oh, let me kiss you!" He rose and went round the table. His wife held up her head so that he could just kiss her hair. "If that is so," he went on, "I am head clerk and officer of the Legion of Honor at once. But you must understand, my dear, Stanislas is not to be the sufferer, poor little man." "Poor little man?" Lisbeth put in. "You have not set your eyes on him these 7 months. I am supposed to be his mother at the school. I am the only person in the house who takes any trouble about him." "A brat that costs us 100 crowns a quarter," said Valerie. "And he at any rate is your own child, Marneffe. You ought to pay for his schooling out of your salary. The newcomer, far from reminding us of butcher's bills, will rescue us from want." "Valerie," replied Marneffe, assuming an attitude like Crevel, "I hope that Monsieur le Baron Hulot will take proper charge of his son, and not lay the burden on a poor clerk. I intend to keep him well up to the mark. So take the necessary steps, madame. Get him to write you letters in which he alludes to his satisfaction, for he is rather backward in coming forward in regard to my appointment." And Marneffe went away to the office, where his chief's precious leniency allowed him to come in at about 11 o'clock. And indeed he did little enough, for his incapacity was notorious, and he detested work. No sooner were they alone than Lisbeth and Valerie looked at each other for a moment like augurs, and both together burst into a loud fit of laughter. "I say, Valerie, is it the fact," said Lisbeth, "or merely a farce?" "It is a physical fact," replied Valerie. "Now, I am sick and tired of Hortense, and it occurred to me in the night that I might fire this infant, like a bomb, into the Steinbock household." Valerie went back to her room, followed by Lisbeth, to whom she showed the following letter: "Wenceslas, my dear, I still believe in your love, though it is nearly 3 weeks since I saw you. Is this scorn? Delilah can scarcely believe that. Does it not rather result from the tyranny of a woman whom, as you told me, you can no longer love? Wenceslas, you are too great an artist to submit to such dominion. Home is the grave of glory. Consider now, are you the Wenceslas of the Rue du Doyenne? You missed fire with my father's statue. But in you the lover is greater than the artist, and you have had better luck with his daughter. You are a father, my beloved Wenceslas. If you do not come to me in the state I am in, your friends would think very badly of you. But I love you so madly that I feel I should never have the strength to curse you. May I sign myself as ever, your Valerie. What do you say to my scheme for sending this note to the studio at a time when our dear Hortense is there by herself?" asked Valerie. "Last evening I heard from Stidmann that Wenceslas is to pick him up at 11 this morning to go on business to Chanor's. So that gawk Hortense will be there alone." "But after such a trick as that," replied Lisbeth, "I cannot continue to be your friend in the eyes of the world. I shall have to break with you, to be supposed never to visit you or even to speak to you." "Evidently," said Valerie, "but—" "Oh, be quite easy," interrupted Lisbeth. "We shall often meet when I am Madame la Marechale. They are all set upon it now. Only the Baron is in ignorance of the plan, but you can talk him over." "Well," said Valerie, "but it is quite likely that the Baron and I may be on distant terms before long." "Madame Olivier is the only person who can make Hortense demand to see the letter," said Lisbeth, "and you must send her to the Rue Saint Dominique before she goes on to the studio." "Our beauty will be at home, no doubt," said Valerie, ringing for Reine to call up Madame Olivier. 10 minutes after the despatch of this fateful letter, Baron Hulot arrived. Madame Marneffe threw her arms round the old man's neck with kittenish impetuosity. "Hector, you are a father," she said in his ear. "That is what comes of quarreling and making friends again." Perceiving a look of surprise, which the Baron did not at once conceal, Valerie assumed a reserve which brought the old man to despair. She made him wring the proofs from her one by one. When conviction, led on by vanity, had at last entered his mind, she enlarged on Monsieur Marneffe's wrath. "My dear old veteran," said she, "you can hardly avoid getting your responsible editor, our representative partner, if you like, appointed head clerk and officer of the Legion of Honor, for you really have done for the poor man. He adores his Stanislas, the little monstrosity who is so like him that to me he is insufferable. Unless you prefer to settle 1,200 francs a year on Stanislas, the capital to be his and the life interest payable to me, of course. But if I am to settle securities, I would rather it should be on my own son, and not on the monstrosity," said the Baron. This rash speech, in which the words "my own son" came out as full as a river in flood, was, by the end of the hour, ratified as a formal promise to settle 1,200 francs a year on the future boy. And this promise became, on Valerie's tongue and in her countenance, what a drum is in the hands of a child. For 3 weeks she played on it incessantly. At the moment when Baron Hulot was leaving the Rue Vanneau, as happy as a man who, after a year of married life, still desires an heir, Madame Olivier had yielded to Hortense and given up the note she was instructed to give only into the Count's own hands. The young wife paid 20 francs for that letter. The wretch who commits suicide must pay for the opium, the pistol, the charcoal. Hortense read and re-read the note. She saw nothing but this sheet of white paper streaked with black lines. The universe held for her nothing but that paper. Everything was dark around her. The glare of the conflagration that was consuming the edifice of her happiness lighted up the page, for blackest night enfolded her. The shouts of her little Wenceslas at play fell on her ear, as if he had been in the depths of a valley and she on a high mountain. Thus insulted at 24, in all the splendor of her beauty, enhanced by pure and devoted love, it was not a stab, it was death. The first shock had been merely on the nerves. The physical frame had struggled in the grip of jealousy. But now certainty had seized her soul, her body was unconscious. For about 10 minutes Hortense sat under the incubus of this oppression. Then a vision of her mother appeared before her, and revulsion ensued. She was calm and cool and mistress of her reason. She rang. "Get Louise to help you, child," said she to the cook. "As quickly as you can, pack up everything that belongs to me, and everything wanted for the little boy. I give you an hour. When all is ready, fetch a hackney coach from the stand, and call me. Make no remarks. I am leaving the house, and shall take Louise with me. You must stay here with monsieur. Take good care of him." She went into her room and wrote the following letter: Monsieur le Comte, the letter I enclose will sufficiently account for the determination I have come to. When you read this, I shall have left your house and have found refuge with my mother, taking our child with me. Do not imagine that I shall retrace my steps. Do not imagine that I am acting with the rash haste of youth, without reflection, with the anger of offended affection. You will be greatly mistaken. I have been thinking very deeply during the last fortnight of life, of love, of our marriage, of our duties to each other. I have known the perfect devotion of my mother. She has told me all her sorrows. She has been heroical every day for 23 years. But I have not the strength to imitate her, not because I love you less than she loves my father, but for reasons of spirit and nature. Our home would be a hell. I might lose my head so far as to disgrace you, disgrace myself and our child. I refuse to be a Madame Marneffe. Once launched on such a course, a woman of my temper might not perhaps be able to stop. I am, unfortunately for myself, an Hulot, not a Fischer. Alone and absent from the scene of your dissipations, I am sure of myself, especially with my child to occupy me, and by the side of a strong and noble mother, whose life cannot fail to influence the vehement impetuousness of my feelings. There I can be a good mother, bring our boy up well, and live. Under your roof the wife would oust the mother, and constant contention would sour my temper. I can accept a death blow, but I will not endure for 25 years like my mother. If at the end of 3 years of perfect, unwavering love, you can be unfaithful to me with your father-in-law's mistress, what rivals may I expect to have in later years? Indeed, monsieur, you have begun your career of profligacy much earlier than my father did the life of dissipation, which is a disgrace to the father of a family, which undermines the respect of his children, and which ends in shame and despair. I am not unforgiving. Unrelenting feelings do not beseem erring creatures living under the eye of God. If you win fame and fortune by sustained work, if you have nothing to do with courtesans and ignoble defiling ways, you will find me still a wife worthy of you. I believe you to be too much a gentleman, Monsieur le Comte, to have recourse to the law. You will respect my wishes, and leave me under my mother's roof. Above all, never let me see you there. I have left all the money lent to you by that odious woman. Farewell. Hortense Hulot. This letter was written in anguish. Hortense abandoned herself to the tears, the outcries of murdered love. She laid down her pen and took it up again, to express as simply as possible all that passion commonly proclaims in this sort of testamentary letter. Her heart went forth in exclamations, wailing and weeping, but reason dictated the words. Informed by Louise that all was ready, the young wife slowly went round the little garden, through the bedroom and drawing-room, looking at everything for the last time. Then she earnestly enjoined the cook to take the greatest care for her master's comfort, promising to reward her handsomely if she would be honest. At last she got into the hackney coach to drive to her mother's house, her heart quite broken, crying so much as to distress the maid, and covering little Wenceslas with kisses, which betrayed her still unfailing love for his father. The Baroness knew already from Lisbeth that the father-in-law was largely to blame for the son-in-law's fault, nor was she surprised to see her daughter, whose conduct she approved, and she consented to give her shelter. Adeline, perceiving that her own gentleness and patience had never checked Hector, for whom her respect was indeed fast diminishing, thought her daughter very right to adopt another course. In 3 weeks the poor mother had suffered 2 wounds, of which the pain was greater than any ill fortune she had hitherto endured. The Baron had placed Victorin and his wife in great difficulties, and then, by Lisbeth's account, he was the cause of his son-in-law's misconduct, and had corrupted Wenceslas. The dignity of the father of the family, so long upheld by her really foolish self-sacrifice, was now overthrown. Though they did not regret the money, the young Hulots were full alike of doubts and uneasiness as regarded the Baron. This sentiment, which was evidence enough, distressed the Baroness. She foresaw a break-up of the family tie. Hortense was accommodated in the dining-room, arranged as a bedroom with the help of the Marshal's money, and the ante-room became the dining-room, as it is in many apartments. When Wenceslas returned home and had read the 2 letters, he felt a kind of gladness mingled with regret. Kept so constantly under his wife's eye, so to speak, he had inwardly rebelled against this fresh thraldom à la Lisbeth. Full fed with love for 3 years past, he too had been reflecting during the last fortnight, and he found a family heavy on his hands. He had just been congratulated by Stidmann on the passion he had inspired in Valerie. For Stidmann, with an underthought that was not unnatural, saw that he might flatter the husband's vanity in the hope of consoling the victim. And Wenceslas was glad to be able to return to Madame Marneffe. Still, he remembered the pure and unsullied happiness he had known, the perfections of his wife, her judgment, her innocent and guileless affection, and he regretted her acutely. He thought of going at once to his mother-in-law's to crave forgiveness, but, in fact, like Hulot and Crevel, he went to Madame Marneffe, to whom he carried his wife's letter to show her what a disaster she had caused, and to discount his misfortune, so to speak, by claiming in return the pleasures his mistress could give him. He found Crevel with Valerie. The mayor, puffed up with pride, marched up and down the room, agitated by a storm of feelings. He put himself into position as if he were about to speak, but he dared not. His countenance was beaming, and he went now and again to the window, where he drummed on the pane with his fingers. He kept looking at Valerie with a glance of tender pathos. Happily for him, Lisbeth presently came in. "Cousin Betty," he said in her ear, "have you heard the news? I am a father. It seems to me I love my poor Celestine the less. Oh, what a thing it is to have a child by the woman one idolizes! It is the fatherhood of the heart added to that of the flesh. I say, tell Valerie that I will work for that child. It shall be rich. She tells me she has some reason for believing that it will be a boy. If it is a boy, I shall insist on his being called Crevel. I will consult my notary about it." "I know how much she loves you," said Lisbeth, "but for her sake in the future, and for your own, control yourself. Do not rub your hands every 5 minutes." While Lisbeth was speaking aside on this wise to Crevel, Valerie had asked Wenceslas to give her back her letter, and she was saying things that dispelled all his griefs. "So now you are free, my dear," said she. "Ought any great artist to marry? You live only by fancy and freedom. There, I shall love you so much, beloved poet, that you shall never regret your wife. At the same time, if, like so many people, you want to keep up appearances, I undertake to bring Hortense back to you in a very short time." "Oh, if only that were possible!" "I am certain of it," said Valerie, nettled. "Your poor father in law is a man who is in every way utterly done for, who wants to appear as though he could be loved, out of conceit, and to make the world believe that he has a mistress; and he is so excessively vain on this point, that I can do what I please with him. The Baroness is still so devoted to her old Hector I always feel as if I were talking of the Iliad that these two old folks will contrive to patch up matters between you and Hortense. Only, if you want to avoid storms at home for the future, do not leave me for 3 weeks without coming to see your mistress. I was dying of it. My dear boy, some consideration is due from a gentleman to a woman he has so deeply compromised, especially when, as in my case, she has to be very careful of her reputation. Stay to dinner, my darling, and remember that I must treat you with all the more apparent coldness, because you are guilty of this too obvious mishap." Baron Montes was presently announced. Valerie rose and hurried forward to meet him. She spoke a few sentences in his ear, enjoining on him the same reserve as she had impressed on Wenceslas. The Brazilian assumed a diplomatic reticence suitable to the great news which filled him with delight, for he, at any rate, was sure of his paternity. Thanks to these tactics, based on the vanity of the man in the lover stage of his existence, Valerie sat down to table with 4 men, all pleased and eager to please, all charmed, and each believing himself adored. Called by Marneffe, who included himself, in speaking to Lisbeth, the 5 fathers of the Church. Baron Hulot alone at first showed an anxious countenance, and this was why. Just as he was leaving the office, the head of the staff of clerks had come to his private room, a general with whom he had served for 30 years, and Hulot had spoken to him as to appointing Marneffe to Coquet's place, Coquet having consented to retire. "My dear fellow," said he, "I would not ask this favor of the Prince without our having agreed on the matter, and knowing that you approved." "My good friend," replied the other, "you must allow me to observe that, for your own sake, you should not insist on this nomination. I have already told you my opinion. There would be a scandal in the office, where there is a great deal too much talk already about you and Madame Marneffe. This is, of course, between ourselves. I have no wish to touch you on a sensitive spot, or disoblige you in any way, and I will prove it. If you are determined to get Monsieur Coquet's place, and he will really be a loss in the War Office, for he has been here since 1809, I will go into the country for a fortnight, so as to leave the field open between you and the Marshal, who loves you as a son. Then I shall take neither part, and shall have nothing on my conscience as an administrator." "Thank you very much," said Hulot. "I will reflect on what you have said." "In allowing myself to say so much, my dear friend, It is because your personal interest is far more deeply implicated than any concern or vanity of mine. In the first place, the matter lies entirely with the Marshal. And then, my good fellow, we are blamed for so many things that one more or less. We are not at the maiden stage in our experience of fault-finding. Under the Restoration, men were put in simply to give them places, without any regard for the office. We are old friends." "Yes," the Baron put in, "and it is in order not to impair our old and valued friendship that I—" "Well, well," said the departmental manager, seeing Hulot's face clouded with embarrassment, "I will take myself off, old fellow. But I warn you, you have enemies, that is to say, men who covet your splendid appointment, and you have but one anchor out. Now, if, like me, you were a deputy, you would have nothing to fear. So mind what you are about." This speech, in the most friendly spirit, made a deep impression on the Councillor of State. "But after all, Roger, what is it that is wrong? Do not make any mysteries with me." The individual addressed as Roger looked at Hulot, took his hand, and pressed it. "We are such old friends that I am bound to give you warning. If you want to keep your place, you must make a bed for yourself, and instead of asking the Marshal to give Coquet's place to Marneffe, in your place I would beg him to use his influence to reserve a seat for me on the General Council of State. There you may die in peace, and, like the beaver, abandon all else to the pursuers." "What, do you think the Marshal would forget—" "The Marshal has already taken your part so warmly at a general meeting of the ministers that you will not now be turned out, but it was seriously discussed. So give them no excuse. I can say no more. At this moment you may make your own terms. You may sit on the Council of State and be made a peer of the Chamber. If you delay too long, if you give any one a hold against you, I can answer for nothing. Now, am I to go?" "Wait a little, I will see the Marshal," replied Hulot, "and I will send my brother to see which way the wind blows at headquarters." The humor in which the Baron came back to Madame Marneffe's may be imagined. He had almost forgotten his fatherhood, for Roger had taken the part of a true and kind friend in explaining the position. At the same time, Valerie's influence was so great that, by the middle of dinner, the Baron was tuned up to the pitch, and was all the more cheerful for having unwonted anxieties to conceal. But the hapless man was not yet aware that in the course of that evening he would find himself in a cleft stick, between his happiness and the danger pointed out by his friend, compelled, in short, to choose between Madame Marneffe and his official position. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Cousin Betty by Honoré de Balzac, translated by James Waring. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 25. At 11 o'clock, when the evening was at its gayest, for the room was full of company, Valerie drew Hector into a corner of her sofa. "My dear old boy," said she, "your daughter is so annoyed at knowing that Wenceslas comes here, that she has left him planted. Hortense is wrong-headed. Ask Wenceslas to show you the letter the little fool has written to him. This division of two lovers, of which I am reputed to be the cause, may do me the greatest harm, for this is how virtuous women undermine each other. It is disgraceful to pose as a victim in order to cast the blame on a woman whose only crime is that she keeps a pleasant house. If you love me, you will clear my character by reconciling the sweet turtle doves. I do not in the least care about your son-in-law's visits. You brought him here, take him away again. If you have any authority in your family, it seems to me that you may very well insist on your wife's patching up this squabble. Tell the worthy old lady from me that if I am unjustly charged with having caused a young couple to quarrel, with upsetting the unity of a family, and annexing both the father and the son-in-law, I will deserve my reputation by annoying them in my own way. Why, here is Lisbeth talking of throwing me over. She prefers to stick to her family, and I cannot blame her for it. She will throw me over, says she, unless the young people make friends again. A pretty state of things. Our expenses here will be trebled." "Oh, as for that," said the Baron on hearing of his daughter's strong measures, "I will have no nonsense of that kind." "Very well," said Valerie. "And now for the next thing. What about Coquet's place?" "That," said Hector, looking away, "is more difficult, not to say impossible." "Impossible? My dear Hector," said Madame Marneffe in the Baron's ear. "But you do not know to what lengths Marneffe will go. I am completely in his power. He is immoral for his own gratification, like most men, but he is excessively vindictive, like all weak and impotent natures. In the position to which you have reduced me, I am in his power. I am bound to be on terms with him for a few days, and he is quite capable of refusing to leave my room any more." Hulot started with horror. "He would leave me alone on condition of being head clerk. It is abominable, but logical." "Valerie, do you love me?" "In the state in which I am, my dear, the question is the meanest insult." "Well, then, if I were to attempt, merely to attempt, to ask the Prince for a place for Marneffe, I should be done for, and Marneffe would be turned out." "I thought that you and the Prince were such intimate friends." "We are, and he has amply proved it. But, my child, there is authority above the marshals, for instance, the whole Council of Ministers. With time and a little tacking we shall get there. But to succeed, I must wait till the moment when some service is required of me. Then I can say one good turn deserves another." "If I tell Marneffe this tale, my poor Hector, he will play us some mean trick. You must tell him yourself that he has to wait. I will not undertake to do so. Oh, I know what my fate would be. He knows how to punish me. He will henceforth share my room. Do not forget to settle the 1,200 francs a year on the little one." Hulot, seeing his pleasures in danger, took Monsieur Marneffe aside, and for the first time derogated from the haughty tone he had always assumed towards him, so greatly was he horrified by the thought of that half-dead creature in his pretty young wife's bedroom. "Marneffe, my dear fellow," said he, "I have been talking of you to-day. But you cannot be promoted to the first class just yet. We must have time." "I will be, Monsieur le Baron," said Marneffe shortly. "But, my dear fellow—" "I will be, Monsieur le Baron," Marneffe coldly repeated, looking alternately at the Baron and at Valerie. "You have placed my wife in a position that necessitates her making up her differences with me, and I mean to keep her. For, my dear fellow, she is a charming creature," he added with crushing irony. "I am master here, more than you are at the War Office." The Baron felt one of those pangs of fury which have the effect, in the heart, of a fit of raging toothache, and he could hardly conceal the tears in his eyes. During this little scene, Valerie had been explaining Marneffe's imaginary determination to Montes, and thus had rid herself of him for a time. Of her 4 adherents, Crevel alone was exempted from the rule. Crevel, the master of the little bijou apartment, and he displayed on his countenance an air of really insolent beatitude, notwithstanding the wordless reproofs administered by Valerie in frowns and meaning grimaces. His triumphant paternity beamed in every feature. When Valerie was whispering a word of correction in his ear, he snatched her hand and put in, "To-morrow, my Duchess, you shall have your own little house. The papers are to be signed to-morrow." "And the furniture?" said she, with a smile. "I have 1,000 shares in the Versailles Rive Gauche Railway. I bought them at 25, and they will go up to 300 in consequence of the amalgamation of the 2 lines, which is a secret told to me. You shall have furniture fit for a queen. But then you will be mine alone henceforth?" "Yes, burly mare," said this middle-class Madame de Merteuil, "but behave yourself, respect the future Madame Crevel." "My dear cousin," Lisbeth was saying to the Baron, "I shall go to see Adeline early to morrow; for, as you must see, I cannot with any decency remain here. I will go and keep house for your brother, the Marshal." "I am going home this evening," said Hulot. "Very well, you will see me at breakfast to morrow," said Lisbeth, smiling. She understood that her presence would be necessary at the family scene that would take place on the morrow. And the very first thing in the morning she went to see Victorin and to tell him that Hortense and Wenceslas had parted. When the Baron went home at 10:30, Mariette and Louise, who had had a hard day, were locking up the apartment. Hulot had not to ring. Very much put out at this compulsory virtue, the husband went straight to his wife's room, and through the half-open door he saw her kneeling before her crucifix, absorbed in prayer, in one of those attitudes which make the fortune of the painter or the sculptor who is so happy to invent and then to express them. Adeline, carried away by her enthusiasm, was praying aloud, "O God, have mercy and enlighten him." The Baroness was praying for her Hector. At this sight, so unlike what he had just left, and on hearing this petition founded on the events of the day, the Baron heaved a sigh of deep emotion. Adeline looked round, her face drowned in tears. She was so convinced that her prayer had been heard, that with one spring she threw her arms around Hector with the impetuosity of happy affection. Adeline had given up all a wife's instincts. Sorrow had effaced even the memory of them. No feelings survived in her but those of motherhood, of the family honor, and the pure attachment of a Christian wife for a husband who has gone astray, the saintly tenderness which survives all else in a woman's soul. "Hector," she said, "are you come back to us? Has God taken pity on our family?" "Dear Adeline," replied the Baron, coming in and seating his wife by his side on a couch, "you are the saintliest creature I ever knew. I have long known myself to be unworthy of you." "You would have very little to do, my dear," said she, holding Hulot's hand and trembling so violently that it was as though she had a palsy, "very little to set things in order." She dared not proceed; she felt that every word would be a reproof, and she did not wish to mar the happiness with which this meeting was inundating her soul. "It is Hortense who has brought me here," said Hulot. "That child may do us far more harm by her hasty proceeding than my absurd passion for Valerie has ever done. But we will discuss this to morrow morning. Hortense is asleep, Mariette tells me; we will not disturb her." "Yes," said Madame Hulot, suddenly plunged into the depths of grief. She understood that the Baron's return was prompted not so much by the wish to see his family as by some ulterior interest. "Leave her in peace till to-morrow," said the mother. "The poor child is in a deplorable condition; she has been crying all day." At 9 the next morning, the Baron, awaiting his daughter, whom he had sent for, was pacing the large deserted drawing-room, trying to find arguments by which to conquer the most difficult form of obstinacy there is to deal with, that of a young wife, offended and implacable, as blameless youth ever is, in its ignorance of the disgraceful compromises of the world, of its passions and interests. "Here I am, papa," said Hortense in a tremulous voice, and looking pale from her miseries. Hulot, sitting down, took his daughter round the waist and drew her down to sit on his knee. "Well, my child," said he, kissing her forehead, "so there are troubles at home, and you have been hasty and headstrong? That is not like a well-bred child. My Hortense ought not to have taken such a decisive step as that of leaving her home and deserting her husband on her own account, and without consulting her parents. If my darling girl had come to see her kind and admirable mother, she would not have given me this cruel pain I feel. You do not know the world; it is malignantly spiteful. People will perhaps say that your husband sent you back to your parents. Children brought up as you were, on your mother's lap, remain artless. Maidenly passion, like yours for Wenceslas, unfortunately makes no allowances. It acts on every impulse. The little heart is moved, the head follows suit. You would burn down Paris to be revenged, with no thought of the courts of justice. When your old father tells you that you have outraged the proprieties, you may take his word for it. I say nothing of the cruel pain you have given me. It is bitter, I assure you, for you to throw all the blame on a woman of whose heart you know nothing, and whose hostility may become disastrous. And you, alas, so full of guileless innocence and purity, can have no suspicions, but you may be vilified and slandered. Besides, my darling pet, you have taken a foolish jest too seriously. I can assure you, on my honor, that your husband is blameless. Madame Marneffe—" So far the Baron, artistically diplomatic, had formulated his remonstrances very judiciously. He had, as may be observed, worked up to the mention of this name with superior skill. And yet Hortense, as she heard it, winced as if stung to the quick. "Listen to me. I have had great experience, and I have seen much," he went on, stopping his daughter's attempt to speak. "That lady is very cold to your husband. Yes, you have been made the victim of a practical joke, and I will prove it to you. Yesterday Wenceslas was dining with her." "Dining with her?" cried the young wife, starting to her feet, and looking at her father with horror in every feature. "Yesterday? After having had my letter? Oh, great God! Why did I not take the veil rather than marry? But now my life is not my own, I have the child." And she sobbed. Her weeping went to Madame Hulot's heart. She came out of her room and ran to her daughter, taking her in her arms, and asking her those questions, stupid with grief, which first rose to her lips. "Now we have tears," said the Baron to himself, "and all was going so well. What is to be done with women who cry?" "My child," said the Baroness, "listen to your father. He loves us all. Come, come." "Come, Hortense, my dear little girl, cry no more; you make yourself too ugly," said the Baron. "Now be a little reasonable. Go sensibly home, and I promise you that Wenceslas shall never set foot in that woman's house. I ask you to make the sacrifice, if it is a sacrifice to forgive the husband you love, so small a fault. I ask you, for the sake of my gray hairs and of the love you owe your mother. You do not want to blight my later years with bitterness and regret?" Hortense fell at her father's feet like a crazed thing, with the vehemence of despair. Her hair, loosely pinned up, fell about her, and she held out her hands with an expression that painted her misery. "Father," she said, "ask my life. Take it if you will, but at least take it pure and spotless, and I will yield it up gladly. Do not ask me to die in dishonor and crime. I am not at all like my husband. I cannot swallow an outrage. If I went back under my husband's roof, I should be capable of smothering him in a fit of jealousy, or of doing worse. Do not exact from me a thing that is beyond my powers. Do not have to mourn for me still living, for the least that can befall me is to go mad. I feel madness close upon me. Yesterday, he could dine with that woman after having read my letter? Are other men made so? My life I give you, but do not let my death be ignominious. His fault a small one, when he has a child by that woman?" "A child?" cried Hulot, starting back a step or two. "Come, this is really some fooling." At this juncture Victorin and Lisbeth arrived, and stood dumbfounded at the scene. The daughter was prostrate at her father's feet. The Baroness, speechless between her maternal feelings and her conjugal duty, showed a harassed face bathed in tears. "Lisbeth," said the Baron, seizing his cousin by the hand and pointing to Hortense, "you can help me here. My poor child's brain is turned. She believes that her Wenceslas is Madame Marneffe's lover. while all that Valerie wanted was to have a group by him. "Delilah!" cried the young wife. "The only thing he has done since our marriage. The man would not work for me or for his son, and he has worked with frenzy for that good-for-nothing creature. Oh, father, kill me outright, for every word stabs like a knife." Lisbeth turned to the Baroness and Victorin, pointing with a pitying shrug to the Baron, who could not see her. "Listen to me," said she to him. "I had no idea, when you asked me to go to lodge over Madame Marneffe and keep house for her, I had no idea of what she was. But many things may be learned in 3 years. That creature is a prostitute, and one whose depravity can only be compared with that of her infamous and horrible husband. You are the dupe, my Lord Potboiler, of those people; you will be led further by them than you dream of. I speak plainly, for you are at the bottom of a pit." The Baroness and her daughter, hearing Lisbeth speak in this style, cast adoring looks at her, such as the devout cast at a Madonna for having saved their life. "That horrible woman was bent on destroying your son-in-law's home. To what end, I know not. My brain is not equal to seeing clearly into these dark intrigues. Perverse, ignoble, infamous! Your Madame Marneffe does not love your son-in-law, but she will have him at her feet out of revenge. I have just spoken to the wretched woman as she deserves. She is a shameless courtesan. I have told her that I am leaving her house, that I would not have my honor smirched in that muck heap. I owe myself to my family before all else. I knew that Hortense had left her husband, so here I am. Your Valerie, whom you believe to be a saint, is the cause of this miserable separation. Can I remain with such a woman? Our poor little Hortense," said she, touching the Baron's arm with peculiar meaning, "is perhaps the dupe of a wish of such women as these, who, to possess a toy, would sacrifice a family. I do not think Wenceslas guilty, but I think him weak, and I cannot promise you that he will not yield to her refinements of temptation. My mind is made up. The woman is fatal to you; she will bring you all to utter ruin. I will not even seem to be concerned in the destruction of my own family, after living there for 3 years solely to hinder it. You are cheated, Baron. Say very positively that you will have nothing to say to the promotion of that dreadful Marneffe, and you will see then. There is a fine rod in pickle for you in that case." Lisbeth lifted up Hortense and kissed her enthusiastically. "My dear Hortense, stand firm," she whispered. The Baroness embraced Lisbeth with the vehemence of a woman who sees herself avenged. The whole family stood in perfect silence round the father, who had wit enough to know what the silence implied. A storm of fury swept across his brow and face with evident signs. The veins swelled, his eyes were bloodshot, his flesh showed patches of color. Adeline fell on her knees before him and seized his hands. "My dear, forgive, my dear." "You loathe me!" cried the Baron, the cry of his conscience. For we all know the secret of our own wrongdoing. We almost always ascribe to our victims the hateful feelings which must fill them with the hope of revenge; and in spite of every effort of hypocrisy, our tongue or our face makes confession under the rack of some unexpected anguish, as the criminal of old confessed under the hands of the torturer. "Our children," he went on to retract the avowal, "turn at last to be our enemies." "Father!" Victorin began. "You dare to interrupt your father?" said the Baron in a voice of thunder, glaring at his son. "Father, listen to me," Victorin went on in a clear, firm voice, the voice of a puritanical deputy. "I know the respect I owe you too well ever to fail in it, and you will always find me the most respectful and submissive of sons. Those who are in the habit of attending the sittings of the Chamber will recognize the tactics of parliamentary warfare in these fine drawn phrases, used to calm the factions while gaining time. We are far from being your enemies," his son went on. "I have quarreled with my father in law, Monsieur Crevel. for having rescued your notes of hand for 60,000 francs from Vauvinet, and that money is, beyond doubt, in Madame Marneffe's pocket. I am not finding fault with you, father," said he in reply to an impatient gesture of the Baron's. "I simply wish to add my protest to my cousin Lisbeth's, and to point out to you that though my devotion to you as a father is blind and unlimited, my dear father, our pecuniary resources, unfortunately, are very limited." "Money!" cried the excitable old man, dropping on to a chair, quite crushed by this argument. "From my son! You shall be repaid your money, sir," said he, rising, and he went to the door. "Hector!" At this cry the Baron turned round, suddenly showing his wife a face bathed in tears. She threw her arms round him with the strength of despair. "Do not leave us thus, do not go away in anger. I have not said a word, not I." At this heart-wrung speech the children fell at their father's feet. "We all love you," said Hortense. Lisbeth, as rigid as a statue, watched the group with a superior smile on her lips. Just then Marshal Hulot's voice was heard in the anteroom. The family all felt the importance of secrecy, and the scene suddenly changed. The young people rose, and everyone tried to hide all traces of emotion. A discussion was going on at the door between Mariette and a soldier, who was so persistent that the cook came in. "Monsieur, a regimental quartermaster, who says he is just come from Algiers, insists on seeing you." "Tell him to wait." "Monsieur," said Mariette to her master in an undertone, "he told me to tell you privately that it has to do with your uncle there." The Baron started. He believed that the funds had been sent at last, which he had been asking for these 2 months to pay up his bills. He left the family party and hurried out to the anteroom. "You are Monsieur le Baron Hulot?" "Yes. Your own self?" "My own self." The man, who had been fumbling meanwhile in the lining of his cap, drew out a letter, of which the Baron hastily broke the seal, and read as follows: "Dear nephew, far from being able to send you the 100,000 francs you ask of me, my present position is not tenable unless you can take some decisive steps to save me. We are saddled with a public prosecutor who talks goody and rhodomontades nonsense about the management. It is impossible to get the black chokered pump to hold his tongue. If the War Minister allows civilians to feed out of his hand, I am done for. I can trust the bearer; try to get him promoted, he has done us good service. Do not abandon me to the crows." This letter was a thunderbolt. The Baron could read in it the intestine warfare between civil and military authorities, which to this day hampers the government, and he was required to invent on the spot some palliative for the difficulty that stared him in the face. He desired the soldier to come back next day, dismissing him with splendid promises of promotion, and he returned to the drawing-room. "Good day and good bye, brother," said he to the Marshal. "Good bye, children. Good bye, my dear Adeline. And what are you going to do, Lisbeth?" he asked. "I am going to keep house for the Marshal, for I must end my days doing what I can for one or another of you." "Do not leave Valerie till I have seen you again," said Hulot in his cousin's ear. "Good bye, Hortense, refractory little puss. Try to be reasonable. I have important business to be attended to at once. We will discuss your reconciliation another time. Now think it over, my child," said he as he kissed her. And he went away, so evidently uneasy that his wife and children felt the gravest apprehensions. "Lisbeth," said the Baroness, "I must find out what is wrong with Hector. I never saw him in such a state. Stay a day or two longer with that woman. He tells her everything, and we can then learn what has so suddenly upset him. Be quite easy, we will arrange your marriage to the Marshal, for it is really necessary." "I shall never forget the courage you have shown this morning," said Hortense, embracing Lisbeth. "You have avenged our poor mother," said Victorin. The Marshal looked on with curiosity at all the display of affection lavished on Lisbeth, who went off to report the scene to Valerie. This sketch will enable guileless souls to understand what various mischief Madame Marneffes may do in a family, and the means by which they reach poor, virtuous wives apparently so far out of their ken. And then, if we only transfer, in fancy, such doings to the upper class of society about a throne, and if we consider what kings' mistresses must have cost them, we may estimate the debt owed by a nation to a sovereign who sets the example of a decent and domestic life. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of Cousin Betty by Honoré de Balzac, translated by James Waring. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 26. In Paris, each ministry is a little town by itself, whence women are banished, but there is just as much detraction and scandal as though the feminine population were admitted there. At the end of 3 years, Monsieur Marneffes' position was perfectly clear and open to the day, and in every room one and another asked, "Is Marneffe to be or not to be Coquet's successor?" Exactly as the question might have been put to the Chamber, "Will the estimates pass or not pass?" The smallest initiative on the part of the Board of Management was commented on. Everything in Baron Hulot's department was carefully noted. The astute State Councillor had enlisted on his side the victim of Marneffes' promotion, a hard-working clerk, telling him that if he could fill Marneffes' place, he would certainly succeed to it. He had told him that the man was dying. So this clerk was scheming for Marneffes' advancement. When Hulot went through his anteroom full of visitors, he saw Marneffes' colourless face in a corner, and sent for him before any one else. "What do you want of me, my dear fellow?" said the Baron, disguising his anxiety. "Monsieur le Directeur, I am the laughing stock of the office, for it has become known that the chief of the clerks has left this morning for a holiday on the ground of his health. He is to be away a month. Now we all know what waiting for a month means. You deliver me over to the mockery of my enemies, and it is bad enough to be drummed upon one side; drumming on both at once, monsieur, is apt to burst the drum." "My dear Marneffe, it takes long patience to gain an end. You cannot be made head clerk in less than 2 months, if ever. Just when I must, as far as possible, secure my own position, is not the time to be applying for your promotion, which would raise a scandal." "If you are broke, I shall never get it," said Marneffe coolly. "And if you get me the place, it will make no difference in the end." "Then I am to sacrifice myself for you?" said the Baron. "If you do not, I shall be much mistaken in you." "You are too exclusively Marneffe, Monsieur Marneffe," said Hulot, rising and showing the clerk the door. "I have the honor to wish you good morning, Monsieur le Baron," said Marneffe humbly. "What an infamous rascal!" thought the Baron. "This is uncommonly like a summons to pay within 24 hours on pain of distraint." 2 hours later, just when the Baron had been instructing Claude Vignon, whom he was sending to the Ministry of Justice to obtain information as to the judicial authorities under whose jurisdiction Johann Fischer might fall, Reine opened the door of his private room and gave him a note, saying she would wait for the answer. "Valerie is mad," said the Baron to himself. "To send Reine! It is enough to compromise us all, and it certainly compromises that dreadful Marneffe's chances of promotion." But he dismissed the Minister's private secretary, and read as follows: "Oh, my dear friend, what a scene I have had to endure! Though you have made me happy for 3 years, I have paid dearly for it. He came in from the office in a rage that made me quake. I knew he was ugly, I have seen him a monster. His 4 real teeth chattered, and he threatened me with his odious presence without respite if I should continue to receive you. My poor dear old boy, our door is closed against you henceforth. You see my tears, they are dropping on the paper and soaking it. Can you read what I write, dear Hector? Oh, to think of never seeing you, of giving you up when I bear in me some of your life, as I flatter myself I have your heart. It is enough to kill me. Think of our little Hector. Do not forsake me, but do not disgrace yourself for Marneffe's sake. Do not yield to his threats. I love you as I have never loved. I remember all the sacrifices you have made for your Valerie. She is not and never will be ungrateful. You are, and will ever be, my only husband. Think no more of the 1,200 francs a year I asked you to settle on the dear little Hector who is to come some months hence. I will not cost you anything more, and besides, my money will always be yours. Oh, if you only loved me as I love you, my Hector, you would retire on your pension. We should both take leave of our family, our worries, our surroundings, so full of hatred, and we should go to live with Lisbeth in some pretty country place, in Brittany or wherever you like. There we should see nobody, and we should be happy away from the world. Your pension and the little property I can call my own would be enough for us. You say you are jealous. Well, you would then have your Valerie entirely devoted to her Hector, and you would never have to talk in a loud voice as you did the other day. I shall have but one child, ours. You may be sure, my dearly loved old veteran. You cannot conceive of my fury, for you cannot know how he treated me, and the foul words he vomited on your Valerie. Such words would disgrace my paper. A woman such as I am, Montcornet's daughter, ought never to have heard one of them in her life. I only wish you had been there, that I might have punished him with the sight of the mad passion I felt for you. My father would have killed the wretch. I can only do as women do, love you devotedly. Indeed, my love, in the state of exasperation in which I am, I cannot possibly give up seeing you. I must positively see you, in secret, every day. That is what we are, we women. Your resentment is mine. If you love me, I implore you, do not let him be promoted. Leave him to die a second-class clerk. At this moment I have lost my head. I still seem to hear him abusing me. Betty, who had meant to leave me, has pity on me, and will stay for a few days. My dear kind love, I do not know yet what is to be done. I see nothing for it but flight. I always delight in the country, Brittany, Languedoc, what you will, so long as I am free to love you. Poor dear, how I pity you! Forced now to go back to your old Adeline, to that lacrymal urn, for, as he no doubt told you, the monster means to watch me night and day. He spoke of a detective. Do not come here. He is capable of anything, I know, since he could make use of me for the basest purposes of speculation. I only wish I could return you all the things I have received from your generosity. Ah, my kind Hector, I may have flirted, and have seemed to you to be fickle, but you did not know your Valerie. She liked to tease you, but she loves you better than any one in the world. He cannot prevent your coming to see your cousin. I will arrange with her that we have speech with each other. My dear old boy, write me just a line, pray, to comfort me in the absence of your dear self. Oh, I would give one of my hands to have you by me on our sofa. A letter will work like a charm. Write me something full of your noble soul. I will return your note to you, for I must be cautious. I should not know where to hide it. He pokes his nose in everywhere. In short, comfort your Valerie, your little wife, the mother of your child. To think of my having to write to you, when I used to see you every day. As I say to Lisbeth, I did not know how happy I was. 1,000 kisses, dear boy. Be true to your Valerie. And tears, said Hulot to himself as he finished this letter, tears which have blotted out her name. How is she? Said he to Reine. Madame is in bed. She has dreadful spasms, replied Reine. She had a fit of hysterics that twisted her round like a withy round a faggot. It came on after writing. It comes of crying so much. She heard monsieur's voice on the stairs." The Baron, in his distress, wrote the following note on office paper with a printed heading: "Be quite easy, my angel, he will die a second-class clerk. Your idea is admirable. We will go and live far from Paris, where we shall be happy with our little Hector. I will retire on my pension, and I shall be sure to find some good appointment on a railway. Ah, my sweet friend, I feel so much the younger for your letter. I shall begin life again and make a fortune, you will see, for our dear little one. As I read your letter, 1,000 times more ardent than those of the Nouvelle Heloise, it worked a miracle. I had not believed it possible that I could love you more. This evening, at Lisbeth's, you will see your Hector for life." Reine carried off this reply, the first letter the Baron had written to his sweet friend. Such emotions to some extent counterbalanced the disasters growling in the distance. But the Baron, at this moment believing he could certainly avert the blows aimed at his uncle, Johann Fischer, thought only of the deficit. One of the characteristics of the Bonapartist temperament is a firm belief in the power of the sword, and confidence in the superiority of the military over civilians. Hulot laughed to scorn the public prosecutor in Algiers, where the War Office is supreme. Man is always what he has once been. How can the officers of the Imperial Guard forget that time was when the mayors of the largest towns in the Empire and the Emperor's prefects, emperors themselves on a minute scale, would come out to meet the Imperial Guard, to pay their respects on the borders of the departments through which it passed, and to do it, in short, the homage due to sovereigns? At 4:30 the Baron went straight to Madame Marneffe's. His heart beat as high as a young man's as he went upstairs, for he was asking himself this question: "Shall I see her, or shall I not?" How was he now to remember the scene of the morning when his weeping children had knelt at his feet? Valerie's note, enshrined forever in a thin pocket-book over his heart, proved to him that she loved him more than the most charming of young men. Having rung, the unhappy visitor heard within the shuffling slippers and vexatious scraping cough of the detestable master. Marneffe opened the door, but only to put himself into an attitude and point to the stairs, exactly as Hulot had shown him the door of his private room. "You are too exclusively Hulot, Monsieur Hulot," said he. The Baron tried to pass him. Marneffe took a pistol out of his pocket and cocked it. "Monsieur le Baron," said he, "when a man is as vile as I am, for you think me very vile, don't you? He would be the meanest galley slave if he did not get the full benefit of his betrayed honor. You are for war. It will be hot work and no quarter. Come here no more, and do not attempt to get past me. I have given the police notice of my position with regard to you." And taking advantage of Hulot's amazement, he pushed him out and shut the door. "What a low scoundrel!" said Hulot to himself as he went upstairs to Lisbeth. "I understand her letter now. Valerie and I will go away from Paris. Valerie is wholly mine for the remainder of my days. She will close my eyes." Lisbeth was out. Madame Olivier told the Baron that she had gone to his wife's house, thinking that she would find him there. "Poor thing, I should never have expected her to be so sharp as she was this morning," thought Hulot, recalling Lisbeth's behavior as he made his way from the Rue Vanneau to the Rue Plumet. As he turned the corner of the Rue Vanneau and the Rue de Babylone, he looked back at the Eden whence Hymen had expelled him with the sword of the law. Valerie, at her window, was watching his departure. As he glanced up, she waved her handkerchief, but the rascally Marneffe hit his wife's cap and dragged her violently away from the window. A tear rose to the great official's eye. Oh, to be so well loved! To see a woman so ill used! And to be so nearly 70 years old, thought he. Lisbeth had come to give the family the good news. Adeline and Hortense had already heard that the Baron, not choosing to compromise himself in the eyes of the whole office by appointing Marneffe to the first class, would be turned from the door by the Hulot-hating husband. Adeline, very happy, had ordered a dinner that her Hector was to like better than any of Valerie's. And Lisbeth, in her devotion, was helping Mariette to achieve this difficult result. Cousin Betty was the idol of the hour. Mother and daughter kissed her hands, and had told her with touching delight that the Marshal consented to have her as his housekeeper. "And from that, my dear, there is but one step to becoming his wife," said Adeline. "In fact, he did not say no when Victorin mentioned it," added the Countess. The Baron was welcomed home with such charming proofs of affection, so pathetically overflowing with love, that he was fain to conceal his troubles. Marshal Hulot came to dinner. After dinner, Hector did not go out. Victorin and his wife joined them, and they made up a rubber. "It is a long time, Hector," said the Marshal gravely, "since you gave us the treat of such an evening." This speech from the old soldier, who spoiled his brother though he thus implicitly blamed him, made a deep impression. It showed how wide and deep were the wounds in a heart where all the woes he had divined had found an echo. At 8 o'clock the Baron insisted on seeing Lisbeth home, promising to return. "Do you know, Lisbeth, he ill treats her," said he in the street. "Oh, I never loved her so well." "I never imagined that Valerie loved you so well," replied Lisbeth. "She is frivolous and a coquette. She loves to have attentions paid her, and to have the comedy of love-making performed for her, as she says. But you are her only real attachment." "What message did she send me?" "Why, this," said Lisbeth. "She has, as you know, been on intimate terms with Crevel. You must owe her no grudge, for that, in fact, is what has raised her above utter poverty for the rest of her life. But she detests him, and matters are nearly at an end. Well, she has kept the key of some rooms." "Rue du Dauphin!" cried the thrice blessed Baron. "If it were for that alone, I would overlook Crevel. I have been there, I know." "Here, then, is the key," said Lisbeth. "Have another made from it in the course of to-morrow. 2, if you can." "And then?" said Hulot eagerly. "Well, I will dine at your house again to-morrow. You must give me back Valerie's key, for old Crevel might ask her to return it to him, and you can meet her there the day after. Then you can decide what your facts are to be. You will be quite safe, as there are 2 ways out. If by chance Crevel, who is Regence in his habits, as he is fond of saying, should come in by the side street, you could go out through the shop, or vice versa. You owe all this to me, you old villain. Now, what will you do for me?" "Whatever you want." "Then you will not oppose my marrying your brother?" "You? The Marechal Hulot? The Comtesse de Forzheim?" cried Hector, startled. "Well, Adeline is a baroness," retorted Betty in a vicious and formidable tone. "Listen to me, you old libertine. You know how matters stand. Your family may find itself starving in the gutter." "That is what I dread," said Hulot in dismay. "And if your brother were to die, who would maintain your wife and daughter? The widow of a marshal gets at least 6,000 francs pension, doesn't she? Well, then, I wish to marry to secure bread for your wife and daughter, old dotard." "I had not seen it in that light," said the Baron. "I will talk to my brother, for we are sure of you. Tell my angel that my life is hers." And the Baron, having seen Lisbeth go into the house in the Rue Vanneau, went back to his whist and stayed at home. The Baroness was at the height of happiness; her husband seemed to be returning to domestic habits. For about a fortnight he went to his office at 9 every morning, he came in to dinner at 6, and spent the evening with his family. He twice took Adeline and Hortense to the play. The mother and daughter paid for 3 Thanksgiving masses, and prayed to God to suffer them to keep the husband and father he had restored to them. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of Cousin Betty by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by James Waring. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 27. One evening, Victorin Hulot, seeing his father retire for the night, said to his mother, "Well, we are at any rate so far happy that my father has come back to us. My wife and I shall never regret our capital, if only this lasts." "Your father is nearly 70," said the Baroness. "He still thinks of Madame Marneffe, that I can see, but he will forget her in time. A passion for women is not like gambling or speculation or avarice; there is an end to it." But Adeline, still beautiful in spite of her 50 years and her sorrows, in this was mistaken. Profligates, men whom nature has gifted with the precious power of loving beyond the limits ordinarily set to love, rarely are as old as their age. During this relapse into virtue, Baron Hulot had been 3 times to the Rue du Dauphin, and had certainly not been the man of 70. His rekindled passion made him young again, and he would have sacrificed his honor to Valerie, his family, his all, without a regret. But Valerie, now completely altered, never mentioned money, not even the 1,200 francs a year to be settled on their son. On the contrary, she offered him money. She loved Hulot as a woman of 36 loves a handsome law student, a poor, poetical, ardent boy. And the hapless wife fancied she had reconquered her dear Hector. The 4th meeting between this couple had been agreed upon at the end of the 3rd, exactly as formerly in Italian theatres the play was announced for the next night. The hour fixed was 9 in the morning. On the next day, when the happiness was due for which the amorous old man had resigned himself to domestic rules, at about 8 in the morning, Reine came and asked to see the Baron. Hulot, fearing some catastrophe, went out to speak with Reine, who would not come into the anteroom. The faithful waiting maid gave him the following note: "Dear old man, do not go to the Rue du Dauphin. Our incubus is ill, and I must nurse him. But be there this evening at 9. Crevel is at Corbeil with Monsieur Lebas, so I am sure he will bring no princess to his little palace. I have made arrangements here to be free for the night and get back before Marneffe is awake. Answer me as to all this, for perhaps your long elegy of a wife no longer allows you your liberty as she did. I am told she is still so handsome that you might play me false. You are such a gay dog. Burn this note. I am suspicious of everyone." Hulot wrote this scrap in reply: "My love, as I have told you, my wife has not for 25 years interfered with my pleasures. For you I would give up 100 Adelines. I will be in the Crevel sanctum at 9 this evening, awaiting my divinity. Oh, that your clerk might soon die! We should part no more. And this is the dearest wish of your Hector." That evening the Baron told his wife that he had business with the minister at Saint Cloud, that he would come home at about 4 or 5 in the morning, and he went to the Rue du Dauphin. It was towards the end of the month of June. Few men have in the course of their life known really the dreadful sensation of going to their death. Those who have returned from the foot of the scaffold may be easily counted. But some have had a vivid experience of it in dreams. They have gone through it all to the sensation of the knife at their throat at the moment when waking and daylight come to release them. Well, the sensation to which the Councillor of State was a victim at 5 in the morning in Crevel's handsome and elegant bed was immeasurably worse than that of feeling himself bound to the fatal block in the presence of 10,000 spectators looking at you with 20,000 sparks of fire. Valerie was asleep in a graceful attitude. She was lovely, as a woman is who is lovely enough to look so even in sleep. It is art invading nature, in short, a living picture. In his horizontal position, the Baron's eyes were but 3 feet above the floor. His gaze, wandering idly as that of a man who is just awake and collecting his ideas, fell on a door, painted with flowers by Jeanne, an artist disdainful of fame. The Baron did not, indeed, see 20,000 flaming eyes, like the man condemned to death. He saw but one, of which the shaft was really more piercing than the thousands on the public square. Now this sensation, far rarer in the midst of enjoyment even than that of a man condemned to death, was one for which many a splenetic Englishman would certainly pay a high price. The Baron lay there, horizontal still, and literally bathed in cold sweat. He tried to doubt the fact, but this murderous eye had a voice. A sound of whispering was heard through the door. "So long as it is nobody but Crevel playing a trick on me," said the Baron to himself, only too certain of an intruder in the temple. The door was opened. The majesty of the French law, which in all documents follows next to the king, became visible in the person of a worthy little police officer, supported by a tall justice of the peace, both shown in by Monsieur Marneffe. The police functionary, rooted in shoes of which the straps were tied together with flapping bows, ended at top in a yellow skull almost bare of hair, and a face betraying him as a wide-awake, cheerful, and cunning dog, from whom Paris life had no secrets. His eyes, though garnished with spectacles, pierced the glasses with a keen, mocking glance. The justice of the peace, a retired attorney and an old admirer of the fair sex, envied the delinquent. "Pray excuse the strong measures required by our office, Monsieur le Baron," said the constable. "We are acting for the plaintiff. The justice of the peace is here to authorize the visitation of the premises. I know who you are, and who the lady is who is accused." Valerie opened her astonished eyes, gave such a shriek as actresses use to depict madness on the stage, writhed in convulsions on the bed, like a witch of the Middle Ages in her sulphur-colored frock on a bed of faggots. "Death, and I am ready! My dear Hector, but a police court? Oh, never!" With one bound she passed the 3 spectators and crouched under the little writing table, hiding her face in her hands. "Ruin! Death!" she cried. "Monsieur," said Marneffe to Hulot, "if Madame Marneffe goes mad, you are worse than a profligate, you will be a murderer." What can a man do, what can he say when he is discovered in a bed which is not his, even on the score of hiring, with a woman who is no more his than the bed is? Well, this. "Monsieur the Justice of the Peace, Monsieur the Police Officer," said the Baron with some dignity, "be good enough to take proper care of that unhappy woman, whose reason seems to me to be in danger. You can harangue me afterwards. The doors are locked, no doubt; you need not fear that she will get away, or I either, seeing the costume we wear." The 2 functionaries bowed to the magnate's injunctions. "You come here, miserable cur," said Hulot in a low voice to Marneffe, taking him by the arm and drawing him closer. "It is not I, but you who will be the murderer. You want to be head clerk of your room and officer of the Legion of Honor?" "That in the first place, chief," replied Marneffe with a bow. "You shall be all that. Only soothe your wife and dismiss these fellows." "Nay, nay," said Marneffe knowingly. "These gentlemen must draw up their report as eye-witnesses to the fact. Without that, the chief evidence in my case, where should I be? The higher official ranks are choke-full of rascalities. You have done me out of my wife, and you have not promoted me, Monsieur le Baron. I give you only 2 days to get out of the scrape. Here are some letters." "Some letters?" interrupted Hulot. "Yes, letters which prove that you are the father of the child my wife expects to give birth to. You understand? and you ought to settle on my son a sum equal to what he will lose through this bastard. But I will be reasonable. This does not distress me. I have no mania for paternity myself. 100 louis a year will satisfy me. By to-morrow I must be Monsieur Coquet's successor, and see my name on the list for promotion in the Legion of Honor at the July fetes. Or else the documentary evidence and my charge against you will be laid before the bench. I am not so hard to deal with, after all, you see." "Bless me, and such a pretty woman!" said the justice of the peace to the police constable. "What a loss to the world if she should go mad!" "She is not mad," said the constable sententiously. The police is always the incarnation of scepticism. "Monsieur le Baron Hulot has been caught by a trick," he added, loud enough for Valerie to hear him. Valerie shot a flash from her eye which would have killed him on the spot, if looks could affect the vengeance they express. The police officer smiled. He had laid a snare, and the woman had fallen into it. Marneffe desired his wife to go into the other room and clothe herself decently, for he and the Baron had come to an agreement on all points, and Hulot fetched his dressing gown and came out again. "Gentlemen," said he to the two officials, "I need not impress on you to be secret." The functionaries bowed. The police officer rapped twice on the door. His clerk came in, sat down at the bonheur du jour, and wrote what the constable dictated to him in an undertone. Valerie still wept vehemently. When she was dressed, Hulot went into the other room and put on his clothes. Meanwhile the report was written. Marneffe then wanted to take his wife home, but Hulot, believing that he saw her for the last time, begged the favor of being allowed to speak with her. "Monsieur, your wife has cost me dear enough for me to be allowed to say good bye to her, in the presence of you all, of course." Valerie went up to Hulot, and he whispered in her ear, "There is nothing left for us but to fly. But how can we correspond? We have been betrayed." "Through Reine," she answered. "But, my dear friend, after this scandal we can never meet again. I am disgraced. Besides, you will hear dreadful things about me; you will believe them." The Baron made a gesture of denial. "You will believe them, and I can thank God for that, for then perhaps you will not regret me." "He will not die a second-class clerk," said Marneffe to Hulot, as he led his wife away, saying roughly, "Come, madame, if I am foolish to you, I do not choose to be a fool to others." Valerie left the house, Crevel's Eden, with a last glance at the Baron, so cunning that he thought she adored him. The justice of the peace gave Madame Marneffe his arm to the hackney coach with a flourish of gallantry. The Baron, who was required to witness the report, remained quite bewildered, alone with the police officer. When the Baron had signed, the officer looked at him keenly over his glasses. "You are very sweet on the little lady, Monsieur le Baron." "To my sorrow, as you see." "Suppose that she does not care for you," the man went on, "that she is deceiving you." "I have long known that, monsieur. Here in this very spot, Monsieur Crevel and I told each other." "Oh, then you knew that you were in Monsieur le Maire's private snuggery?" "Perfectly." The constable lightly touched his hat with a respectful gesture. "You are very much in love," said he. "I say no more. I respect an inveterate passion as a doctor respects an inveterate complaint. I saw Monsieur de Nucingen, the banker, attacked in the same way." "He is a friend of mine," said the Baron. "Many a time have I supped with his handsome Esther. She was worth the 2,000,000 francs she cost him." "And more," said the officer. "That caprice of the old Baron's cost 4 persons their lives. Oh, such passions as these are like the cholera." "What had you to say to me?" asked the Baron, who took this indirect warning very ill. "Oh, why should I deprive you of your illusions?" replied the officer. "Men rarely have any left at your age." "Rid me of them!" cried the Councillor. "You will curse the physician later," replied the officer, smiling. "I beg of you, monsieur." "Well, then, that woman was in collusion with her husband." "Oh!" "Yes, sir, and so it is in 2 cases out of every 10. Oh, we know it well." "What proof have you of such a conspiracy?" "In the first place, the husband," said the other, with the calm acumen of a surgeon practised in unbinding wounds. "Mean speculation is stamped in every line of that villainous face. But you, no doubt, set great store by a certain letter written by that woman with regard to the child?" "So much so that I always have it about me," replied Hulot, feeling in his breast pocket for the little pocketbook which he always kept there. "Leave your pocketbook where it is," said the man, as crushing as a thunderclap. "Here is the letter. I now know all I want to know. Madame Marneffe, of course, was aware of what that pocketbook contained?" "She alone in the world." "So I supposed. Now for the proof you asked for of her collusion with her husband." "Let us hear," said the Baron, still incredulous. "When we came in here, Monsieur le Baron, that wretched creature Marneffe led the way, and he took up this letter, which his wife, no doubt, had placed on this writing table," and he pointed to the Bonheur du Jour. "That evidently was the spot agreed upon by the couple in case she should succeed in stealing the letter while you were asleep; for this letter, as written to you by the lady, is, combined with those you wrote to her, decisive evidence in a police court." He showed Hulot the note that Reine had delivered to him in his private room at the office. "It is one of the documents in the case," said the police agent. "Return it to me, monsieur." "Well, monsieur," replied Hulot with bitter expression, "that woman is profligacy itself in fixed ratios. I am certain at this moment that she has 3 lovers." "That is perfectly evident," said the officer. "Oh, they are not all on the streets. When a woman follows that trade in a carriage and a drawing room and her own house, it is not a case for francs and centimes, Monsieur le Baron. Mademoiselle Esther, of whom you spoke, and who poisoned herself, made away with millions. If you will take my advice, you will get out of it, monsieur. This last little game will have cost you dear. That scoundrel of a husband has the law on his side; and indeed, but for me, that little woman would have caught you again." "Thank you, monsieur," said the Baron, trying to maintain his dignity. "Now we will lock up. The farce is played out, and you can send your key to Monsieur the Mayor." Hulot went home in a state of dejection bordering on helplessness, and sunk in the gloomiest thoughts. He woke his noble and saintly wife, and poured into her heart the history of the past 3 years, sobbing like a child deprived of a toy. This confession from an old man young in feeling, this frightful and heart-rending narrative, while it filled Adeline with pity, also gave her the greatest joy. She thanked Heaven for this last catastrophe, for in fancy she saw the husband settled at last in the bosom of his family. "Lisbeth was right," said Madame Hulot gently and without any useless recrimination. "She told us how it would be. Yes, if only I had listened to her, instead of flying into a rage that day when I wanted poor Hortense to go home, rather than compromise the reputation of that. Oh, my dear Adeline, we must save Wenceslas. He is up to his chin in that mire. My poor old man, the respectable middle classes have turned out no better than the actresses," said Adeline with a smile. The Baroness was alarmed at the change in her Hector. When she saw him so unhappy, ailing, crushed under his weight of woes, she was all heart, all pity, all love; she would have shed her blood to make Hulot happy. "Stay with us, my dear Hector. Tell me what it is that such women do to attract you so powerfully. I too will try. Why have you not taught me to be what you want? Am I deficient in intelligence? Men still think me handsome enough to court my favor." Many a married woman, attached to her duty and to her husband, may here pause to ask herself why strong and affectionate men, so tender-hearted to the Madame Marneffes, do not take their wives for the object of their fancies and passions, especially wives like the Baronne Adeline Hulot. This is indeed one of the most recondite mysteries of human nature. Love, which is debauch of reason, the strong and austere joy of a lofty soul, and pleasure, the vulgar counterfeit sold in the market-place, are two aspects of the same thing. The woman who can satisfy both these devouring appetites is as rare in her sex as a great general, a great writer, a great artist, a great inventor in a nation. A man of superior intellect or an idiot, an Hulot or a Crevel, equally crave for the ideal and for enjoyment. All alike go in search of the mysterious compound, so rare that at last it is usually found to be a work in 2 volumes. This craving is a depraved impulse due to society. Marriage, no doubt, must be accepted as a tie. It is life, with its duties and its stern sacrifices on both parts equally. Libertines who seek for hidden treasure are as guilty as other evil-doers who are more hardly dealt with than they. These reflections are not a mere veneer of moralizing; they show the reason of many unexplained misfortunes. But indeed this drama points its own moral, or morals, for they are of many kinds. The Baron presently went to call on the Marshal Prince de Wissembourg, whose powerful patronage was now his only chance. Having dwelt under his protection for 35 years, he was a visitor at all hours, and would be admitted to his rooms as soon as he was up. "Ah, how are you, my dear Hector?" said the great and worthy leader. "What is the matter? You look anxious. And yet the session is ended. One more over. I speak of that now as I used to speak of a campaign; and indeed I believe the newspapers nowadays speak of the sessions as parliamentary campaigns." "We have been in difficulties, I must confess, Marshal, but the times are hard," said Hulot. "It cannot be helped; the world was made so. Every phase has its own drawbacks. The worst misfortune in the year 1841 is that neither the King nor the ministers are free to act as Napoleon was." The Marshal gave Hulot one of those eagle flashes which in its pride, clearness, and perspicacity showed that, in spite of years, that lofty soul was still upright and vigorous. "You want me to do something for you?" said he in a hearty tone. "I find myself under the necessity of applying to you for the promotion of one of my second clerks to the head of a room, as a personal favor to myself, and his advancement to be officer of the Legion of Honor." "What is his name?" said the Marshal, with a look like a lightning flash. "Marneffe." "He has a pretty wife. I saw her on the occasion of your daughter's marriage. If Roger but Roger is away. Hector, my boy, this is concerned with your pleasures. What, you still indulge? Well, you are a credit to the old guard. That is what comes of having been in the commissariat. You have reserves. But have nothing to do with this little job, my dear boy. It is too strong of the petticoat to be good business. No, Marshal, it is bad business, for the police courts have a finger in it. Would you like to see me go there?" "The devil!" said the Prince uneasily. "Go on." "Well, I am in the predicament of a trapped fox. You have always been so kind to me that you will, I am sure, condescend to help me out of the shameful position in which I am placed." Hulot related his misadventures as wittily and as lightly as he could. "And you, Prince, will you allow my brother to die of grief, a man you love so well, or leave one of your staff in the War Office, a Councillor of State, to live in disgrace? This Marneffe is a wretched creature; he can be shelved in 2 or 3 years." "How you talk of 2 or 3 years, my dear fellow," said the Marshal. "But, Prince, the Imperial Guard is immortal." "I am the last of the first batch of marshals," said the Prince. "Listen, Hector. You do not know the extent of my attachment to you. You shall see. On the day when I retire from office, we will go together. But you are not a deputy, my friend. Many men want your place, but for me you would be out of it by this time. Yes, I have fought many a pitched battle to keep you in it. Well, I grant you your 2 requests. It would be too bad to see you riding the bar at your age and in the position you hold. But you stretch your credit a little too far. If this appointment gives rise to discussion, we shall not be held blameless. I can laugh at such things, but you will find it a thorn under your feet. And the next session will see your dismissal. Your place is held out as a bait to 5 or 6 influential men, and you have been enabled to keep it solely by the force of my arguments. I tell you, on the day when you retire, there will be 5 malcontents to 1 happy man. Whereas, by keeping you hanging on by a thread for 2 or 3 years, we shall secure all 6 votes. There was a great laugh at the council meeting. The veteran of the old guard, as they say, was becoming desperately wide awake in parliamentary tactics. I am frank with you, and you are growing gray. You are a happy man to be able to get into such difficulties as these. How long is it since I, Lieutenant Cotin, had a mistress?" He rang the bell. "That police report must be destroyed," he added. "Monseigneur, you are as a father to me. I dared not mention my anxiety on that point." "I still wish I had Roger here," cried the Prince, as Mitouflet, his groom of the chambers, came in. "I was just going to send for him. You may go, Mitouflet. Go you, my dear old fellow, go and have the nomination made out. I will sign it. At the same time, that low schemer will not long enjoy the fruit of his crimes. He will be sharply watched and drummed out of the regiment for the smallest fault. You are saved this time, my dear Hector. Take care for the future. Do not exhaust your friend's patience. You shall have the nomination this morning, and your man shall get his promotion in the Legion of Honor. How old are you now?" "Within 3 months of 70." "What a scapegrace!" said the Prince, laughing. "It is you who deserve a promotion, but, by thunder, we are not under Louis XV." Such is the sense of comradeship that binds the glorious survivors of the Napoleonic phalanx, that they always feel as if they were in camp together, and bound to stand together through thick and thin. "One more favor such as this," Hulot reflected as he crossed the courtyard, "and I am done for." The luckless official went to Baron de Nucingen, to whom he now owed a mere trifle, and succeeded in borrowing 40,000 francs, on his salary pledged for 2 years more. The banker stipulated that in the event of Hulot's retirement on his pension, the whole of it should be devoted to the repayment of the sum borrowed till the capital and interest were all cleared off. This new bargain, like the first, was made in the name of Vauvinet, to whom the Baron signed notes of hand to the amount of 12,000 francs. On the following day the fateful police report, the husband's charge, the letters, all the papers, were destroyed. The scandalous promotion of Monsieur Marneffe, hardly heeded in the midst of the July fetes, was not commented on in any newspaper. End of chapter 27.